Chapter 875. 9 hours later, a metal train full of goods stopped outside Kyoto, in a station that belonged to Doomsday Industries. After the carriage was pulled open, the stench of feces gushed out from it. Bright flashlights shone in, illuminating the haggard faces with disheveled hair and dirty faces. They gathered together. Some were male, some were female, some were old, and some were young. Their faces were bloodless, some were pale, some were sallow, and none of them were healthy. Some people shrank back uneasily, some took the lead nervously, and some young girls bit their lips, tried to wipe their faces clean, puffed out their chests, and quietly pulled down their necklines, trying hard to show their value. There were also people whose eyes were filled with hatred and anger, gritting their teeth. Most of them had no strength left. They just lay on the ground numbly, panting in a daze. Without exception, they were all mixed race. In the silence, Lin Sergio looked at those gazes, wanting to say something, but hesitating. But soon, he retracted his gaze and turned to leave. When he got out of the car, he said to the person there, "Please count the number of people, Wenokoin. Wash them clean and check them. Be quick and finish before the next batch comes." The burly man with sharp teeth nodded and didn't say much nonsense. He raised his hand and put on the hood of his raincoat. He waved his hand behind him, and a dozen people immediately rushed in with short sticks and began to unload the goods violently and efficiently. The whistles were sharp. From time to time, there were rough urges and angry curses. The mixed-race people on the truck were chased down one by one. Regardless of whether they cooperated or resisted, someone immediately stripped them of their clothes. Regardless of gender, age, they directly tied plastic wristbands with printed codes on their wrists, locked them, and stuffed a small piece of soap into them. Then, outside the door, someone holding a faucet turned on the spout, and the cold water violently washed everyone's body. There were sharp exclamations, impatient urges, and rough roars and urges. After washing up, the people were pushed into a temporary disinfection corridor. After passing through the suffocating white fog, they were stuffed with a set of dried uniforms. Immediately, they were sent to the temporary settlement by the carts. No one explained, and no one came out to comfort them. There was no time to waste. There were more people waiting behind. I'm afraid that the people who came to this place wouldn't believe the lies of the rescuer either. Most of the mixed breeds would only think that they were being sold again as cheap tools, disposable consumables, and sent to a crueler place. When they couldn't resist, they could only numbly pray that the darkness waiting for them in front of them wouldn't be too dark. But he did not dare to imagine that there would be light. The cars from Kyushu have already arrived. The smoking homeless man scratched his head and took out a can of beer from his coat pocket. He raised his head and gulped it down. Wiping his mouth, he joked, "So fast. Don't people from Ingzhou like to dawdle? Why are they so fast this time?" Dragonhead's words are indeed effective. The cabin in the woods glanced at him and ignored him. That's the third batch tonight. There was more to come. Sharp curses came from afar. "You will die a horrible death. You will all die a horrible death." In the stinking car, the old man holding the dying child screamed and struggled, but he couldn't resist the rough pull of the extreme Tao and was dragged out. After the child was taken away by the medical guards, he was also stuffed into the washing line. He wailed and cried, but his cries were drowned out by the sound of running water. It was unclear. "Look, they don't believe you." Lawrence tilted his head and lit a cigarette. "Besides, they might not be grateful to you for all you've done. Could it be that my teacher did all this so that they could line up and walk up to him one by one to thank him?" The cabin in the woods was amused and shook his head indifferently. "Come on, he doesn't care. Sounds so noble and pure. It makes me, Green Sun, ashamed." Lawrence shrugged. "Since you know your Green Sun, don't show up in public so high profile, okay?" The cabin in the woods indifferently moved a step to the side, then raised his collar, revealing the symbol of Inspector Doomsday. "Mr. Lawrence, what are you doing here? Can I take a look?" Lawrence looked at him innocently. "I used to have a discerning eye. I could tell at a glance that your teacher was not an ordinary person. We still have a relationship. Don't be so cold. Besides, the mixed hero white paper man is a member of our Green Sun. You can't just wipe your mouth and leave after freeloading, right? Once people started to be shameless, they would be invincible in the world, especially an organization like Green Sun, which could always surprise people in unexpected places. For example, the great hero White Paper Man, who had recently risen to fame in the border area, a good example of Green Sun, the light of the righteous path appointed by the great commander. Undercover in the Astronomy Association, defeating the looming Hall, assassinating Minister Yushing, saving Donbua and leaving, and so on. There were countless rumors. For a time, it attracted the hot blood of many men and the love of many girls. After being freeloaded by the Astronomy Association, Green Sun began to freeload the Astronomy Association. You said that Huaishir was a spy. I said that White Paper Man was our spy. He was a chess piece that the great commander painstakingly buried in order to save innocent mixed-race compatriots. You didn't expect it, did you? If you don't believe it, you can ask Huaishir. This brand-new publicity strategy from the inside out revealed a smell that Huaishir was familiar with. It really made him speechless and unable to refute it. He wanted to refute your mother of asterisk king bullshit, but Donbua and Green Sun really did have that kind of illicit relationship in private. For the sake of a long-term friendship, it was even more difficult to separate them too much. He could only pinch his nose and acquiesce. Over time, even the people of Green Sun started to believe that their family had recently gained a big shot who was insufferably awe-inspiring in Donbua. He was truly powerful beyond compare. So let's talk about it. The cabin in the woods rubbed his eyebrows. I'll say it in advance. I'm just a tool and don't have the ability to make decisions. I know. Lawrence nodded knowingly. It's all the teacher's task, right? If there's a problem, you'll blame it on others. You and your teacher have really learned from each other. Don't worry, it's not trouble. I'm here to do a good deed and help Donbua solve its problems. Lin Sergio looked back at him, full of doubts. Even Green Sun is starting to do good deeds. What's wrong with this world? Even the leader of the 6E society wants to abandon the dark and join the light, let alone Green Sun, right? Lawrence no longer entangled on this point and said straightforwardly, Indeed, I need to congratulate you first. Donbua has completed the crucial second step. After the next hybrid statistics and birthplace are completed, it will become the holy temple in the hearts of all the beastmen. But the key is these people. He raised his finger and drew a circle around the stinking train in front of him. What are you going to do with these people? Donbua is free to arrange them. Lin Sergio replied coldly. You should ask Yuan about the relevant planning. I understand. Donbua needs manpower. All kinds of things have to be done. It lacks manpower and manpower. As long as the hybrids want to live a stable life, they want to be able to find a home there. It's really a good thing. Lawrence smoked and suddenly asked, But what about those who don't want to live a stable life? What are you going to do? The cabin in the woods did not answer him, and Lawrence had already stepped forward. He stood in front of the stinking carriage and looked inside. He did not dislike the filth in it. Instead, he took a deep breath of the stench and exhaled a dim smoke. He sighed softly. Look, Mr. Lin, the feces, the blood, the phlegm, the stench, the enclosed space, the endless fear and waiting. This is what they have experienced along the way, he said sympathetically. How pitiful. The cabin in the woods replied coldly. We have done what we can. I understand. Lawrence turned his head and smiled, but it was exceptionally mocking. Do you know? Even in such an environment, for many people, this was already heaven. Compared to the mines, devil's dens, and poison kills they used to live in, it's like a villa by the sea. It's spring and flowers bloom. It's unimaginably beautiful. As if recalling the past, the tramp's eyes lit up with a strange fire. For many people who are even more unfortunate, this world is like hell. You can't save them, Mr. Lin. You, your teacher, the ivory tower behind your teacher, even the former Utopia and the Astronomy Society are the same. He said firmly, they have long been destroyed by misfortune, pain, and despair. They have been destroyed by everything they have experienced. Family, love, hope. After everything they relied on for a living was taken away, they were injected with malice and grew up in a dark place like hell. A stable life and a beautiful future can't heal them. Their hearts have long been filled with hatred and anger. Your Dambois is not their heaven, nor is it the place they want. They are your burden. Lawrence told him, as long as they have the chance, they will take revenge. As long as they are still alive, they will become hidden dangers and poisonous seedlings. No matter how many times you try to save them, they won't be used again. The cabin in the forest lowered his head indifferently and lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth. Dambois has its own management system. You don't have to worry about it. The system can't solve all problems. Lawrence said, there are more suitable places for them in this world. He glanced into the distance. In the deep night, there was nothing. He was referring to a more distant and ethereal place, the bottom of the sealed border, Canaan, the place where the abandoned gathered together to keep warm. I want to take them away, Lawrence said. The cabin in the forest did not say anything. He just smoked. He raised his head silently and stared at the sky above his head. But there were no stars in the sky, only dark clouds. He suddenly thought, if the teacher was here, how would he answer? But then he suddenly did not want to continue thinking, because he already knew the answer. That guy would definitely shake his head indifferently, right? A cold rejection, a mocking retort, and mercilessly cut off Lawrence's thoughts, silently putting all the burden on himself. Regardless of what kind of disaster a moment of kindness would bury in the future, he would never allow anyone with a future to walk into hell and go to that kind of place. Fortunately, he was different from the teacher. The cabin in the forest shook his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. No matter how brilliant the teacher was, it was inevitable that there would be scum students, right? The world was like this. It was really sad. He lowered his head and stopped looking at the sky. He finished smoking in silence. After stepping on the cigarette and putting it out, he let out a long breath and talked to himself. Dambois is not a prison, the cabin in the forest said. This is a place where you can come and go freely. After saying that, he no longer paid any attention to Lawrence. He turned and left. Outside the station, in the back of the car, the girl, who was a little bored from the long wait, was playing games with her head down when she heard the sound of the door opening. Back so soon? She looked up curiously. I thought you would be busy until late. I'm a little tired. I want to rest. Do you want to go back? I could drive. No need. The tired man rubbed his face and lowered his head. Just a little sleep for a while. Then sleep. Mountain can... The girl reached out, rubbed his hair, and told him, it doesn't matter how long you sleep. I will be with you. She smiled, and her eyes were as bright as stars. A gentle hug. The cabin in the forest closed his eyes. Chapter 876. I don't know what the people from Green Sun just said, but Lincoln couldn't lift his spirits. Thank you for your hard work. Please have a good rest. Leave the rest to me. Although it's not good to say this, can you kill the bad guy? Please be magnanimous. I'll take care of it. Then I'll leave it to you, Yuan Chan. 3. 10 minutes later, Yuan put down her phone and rubbed her swollen forehead. She couldn't help but sigh. The old assistant from the ivory tower brought over a cup of tea and smiled. What's the problem now? It's rare to see you so worried. Lawrence went to find little 19. For the new beast men, what else could it be? Yuan shook her head. I'm afraid it's also Green Sun's instruction. They want to take advantage of the gap when teacher is not here. In a short period of time, Dambois needs the power of Green Sun to spread his influence among the beastmen between the borders. There's no way to divide them. As a new force, no matter how bright the future was, it was still in a state of development and preparation. Dambois' attitude couldn't be blindly tough. Sometimes, as long as it didn't touch the bottom line and principles, a temporary compromise was necessary. Most of the time, compared to the decisiveness of doing everything in one fell swoop, the tenacity of dripping water is more precious and difficult. The old assistant, Freeman, pushed his glasses and sighed softly. Over the past few days, as an assistant from the ivory tower and the main management member of the campus, he had witnessed the rapid changes here with his own eyes. Even after leaving Huaishur, his students still faithfully carried out the plans and goals he left behind without any deviation or wavering. Outstanding talent aside, this firm determination was even more admirable. Mr. Lin is too harsh on himself. The old assistant smiled and comforted her. I believe that to be able to do this, Mr. Huaisher will also be gratified by your growth. Maybe, but he won't necessarily be happy. Yuan shook her head and sighed. To be honest, even as someone who was trusted, Yuan often felt the extent of her teacher's excessive ambition in the complicated work that she had to deal with. How could he just throw such an important task to someone else? Two students who hadn't even graduated yet. This was not a relaxing assistant who could help him grade homework or attend classical music classes, but a major power that could affect Damwa's future. Even if he had the support of the Ivory Tower, he was still too confident. He didn't have to worry about the 6He society infiltrating the alliance, nor did he have to worry about the Jin family controlling his lifeline. They were even more indulgent than they were. Because of this, Yuan would be more cautious when making decisions on behalf of him. Lin Shurjiu was even more cautious. Every day he would say, "It's just my teacher's task." How he wished he could become a fully automatic tool. It was as if a newbie player had suddenly been thrown aside by a top-notch big shot account that he could play and learn as he pleased. The pressure was immense. However, progress and growth were equally gratifying. But even so, they still had their limits. In the face of this world, even a behemoth like the Astronomy Association was still powerless, let alone a mere Danbo. There were some things that even Huaisher couldn't solve. Just like those beast traits who were filled with hatred, they had already fallen into their own hell. There was no cure. Even if they stayed, they would only become a hidden danger. Don't feel sorry. Freeman looked at the numbers on the report and sighed helplessly. This is an inevitable choice. I believe Mr. Huaisher can understand. Teacher will definitely understand and will be very angry. Yuan raised her eyes and said calmly, "It's not because Forest Hut gave up on those people, but because he took this responsibility for himself." She was completely sure of this. Even if he knew all this, Huaisher would never have any criticism or dissatisfaction with Forest Hut, but he would also not agree with his choice. Because even if he had to make a sacrifice, it was not something that Forest Hut should decide, and it should not be a stain on his hands. He should not follow the same path as the Lin family. Ever since the day she had accepted him as her student, Huaisher had never had such a thought. Even if it was natural for the Lin family to take the blame, and even the Lin family themselves felt so. Even if the Astronomy Society wanted to pursue Damwa after the event, Huaisher would definitely forge his own signature to prove that all of this was his instruction. Isn't the so-called teacher and student like this? The old assistant chuckled softly. In comparison, children are an extension of the bloodline, and students are the ideal future. He hopes that you can be better than himself. He is the future of others, and in the future, you will also be his future. This is the meaning of inheritance. It's really heavy. Yuan rubbed her eyebrows and sighed in distress. Don't worry, there is a heavier reality waiting for you. Freeman put down his pen and knocked on the table. The report on the table flew up as if it was alive, danced, and landed on Yuan's table. It neatly turned into a stack. He said, "You also have to make a decision, madam." Now, when Huaisher left, the affairs of the Damwa campus were jointly decided by the two students appointed by Huaisher as agents. This was not because the Ivory Tower's assistance was insufficient, but out of respect for the campus, they would not overstep their authority. Only when the two could not agree would it be uploaded to the School Affairs Office according to the procedure. If the School Affairs Office could not make a decision, then Vice Principal Isaac would discuss it with Russell. For example now, the preliminary population census of the Damwa district had come out with results, and part of it covered the beastmen who were constantly gathering in Damwa from the present and the border. In that case, the biggest problem they had to face was how to settle them down. With the size of Damwa, no matter how many came, it would be able to digest them. After obtaining civil rights, anyone with a skill would be able to get a foothold in Damwa. Even if they did not know anything, they would be able to earn a living if they worked hard. not to mention the training that the ivory tower's abundant educational resources could provide. In this situation, the most troublesome were not the homeless who had nowhere to settle down, nor were the homeless people with hatred. Instead, it was the old, weak, sick, and disabled. Due to the torment of illness, the average lifespan of the beastmen was generally no more than 50 years old. Those who were over 40 years old were already considered old. Moreover, long-term malnutrition and the erosion of the abyss sediment, as well as the restrictions of the living environment and the lack of medical conditions, caused most people to age prematurely. What's more serious is that the beastmen who were recently transported here. Freeman adjusted his glasses and hesitated to speak. Most of them were used as cheap labor and slaves. They worked in mines and workshops that did not see the light of day for many years. Some were even used to cultivate and experiment with forbidden drugs, not to mention the tragic experiences of selling sex and organs. Many of them even doubted how they were still alive when their bodies were examined. How to settle these people was now the top priority. Should they be saved? Should they be treated? How much subsidies would they have to pay? After treatment, they might not be able to recover. After recovery, they might not be able to work. Even if they worked, they would definitely bid farewell to physical activity. But did Dombois really have so many jobs? From the coldest and most utilitarian point of view, those people full of hatred were not a burden to Dombois. These sick and weak people were, and the damage caused would only be greater than those people. If it was not properly dealt with, Dombois, who had just started out, would undoubtedly be covered with a layer of shadow. It would also be an unbearable burden for the finances. No matter what, let's hurry up and treat them. After all, time is precious. Yuan sighed in distress. Don't we have an agreement with the medical institution of the continuation hospital, providing the biological data and information of the beastmen, plus the experimental and cost reduction of the new drug? It might not cost much. What's the next arrangement? Freeman asked. Will Dombois be responsible for their future lives? There's one good thing about modern society. It's not easy to eat, and it's easy to eat until you're full. It's just a few more mouths. If they can engage in physical activity, doing some light and simple social work, even pasting paper boxes is better than doing nothing. Yuan thought for a moment and said seriously, let's do our best. This is not something that can be solved with a moment of determination and effort. Freeman reminded, for Dombois' finances, this is a long-term pressure and may even last longer. There will be more problems in the future. Do we need to discuss it with Mr. Lin? He won't object. Yuan laughed. Otherwise, the teacher won't be angry when he comes back. He'll beat them up. She was also incomparably sure of this. From a perspective of management, this is something that doesn't have any cost-performance ratio. Dombois is not responsible for them, Miss Yuan. Freeman said, we don't owe them anything, and we've even done our best. Even if we give up, no one can blame us. They're just unlucky. They didn't come at the right time. But if you want to do something, how can you just look at the pros and cons? There are always things to do, Mr. Freeman, whether good or bad. This was not the same as doing business. It had nothing to do with the so-called luck. This is not their luck, she said. This is Dombois' responsibility. So, Yuan calmly picked up the pen, signed her name at the end, and stamped Dombois' seal. Then, she reached for the next document. The work continued. Some burdens could be cut off, but some burdens must be left behind. True or false, good or bad, lies or hope. Time would tell. This vast destiny was the proof of the existence of the future. At the same time, on top of Helios, Huaisher raised his eyes. A lonely and pure silhouette leapt out from the heart of the eternal frost furnace in front of him. Stepping on the steel ground that had turned green, the white deer nimbly strolled through the irises. Its tall antlers spread out like a tree crown, growing countless flowers. Its clear eyes quietly observed everything in front of it. Origin, substance, equipment, compassion, incarnation. Chapter 877. Unexpectedly, after passing the most difficult period of development at the beginning, the subsequent battles were smooth sailing. It was simply a crushing defeat. Such a lackluster development was completely out of Huai-Shi's expectations. He had been prepared to write 100,000 words in the Book of Destinies, but he did not expect to skip the early stages with a quick refresh. Still, that was normal. He had Grandmaster Mikhail as his backer, the Eternal Frost Furnace as his support, and the remains of Grandmaster Pubris as his mediator. Not to mention, he had a wide network of connections, and most importantly, the omnipotent Tong Ji support. Even the referee is on my side, okay? Unless he had to arm wrestle against a bug player like the Grandmaster. How could the other players with no paywalls fight him? Just like now. In the instant that the doors to the Eternal Frost Furnace opened, the face of the opposing alchemist quickly turned unsightly. At first, he had intended to grit his teeth and struggle for a bit after comparing the height difference between the two towers, and there might be a chance of victory if he used the field's mechanics well. But when the incarnation of wrath stepped out of the darkness with two fiery glints in its eyes, his majestic hellish horde began to tremble. When the white deer of compassion silently appeared from behind, the summoned creature at the front was already on the verge of losing its balance. In the literal sense of the word, it was as if spring had arrived on the battlefield that was suddenly filled with lush grasses and flying orioles, chirping birds and fragrant flowers. All things were growing wildly. Innumerable, bewitching, poisonous flowers and vile grasses were spreading ever-changing poisonous strains, and where the green light passed, all things withered. On the other hand, the Paradise Guardians who were brandishing their greatswords and axes appeared to have been drugged. Their bodies swelled and were full of energy, their mouths shouting chaotic battle cries as their eyes glinted with green light over their ferocious faces. After 3 iterations of the casting technology, this group of guards had become out-and-out Iron King Kong. Even the smallest of them was more than 3 meters tall. Not a single part of their body was original, and all of them were relic equipment that had been animated through forging. Paradise Guardians, Dusk Village Collectors Edition V3.0. Other than the increase in numbers, the addition of heralds, elite swordsmen, artillery squad, and other more detailed classifications, there was even a new branch advancement, Dusk Knight. In theory, this was the cavalry under the prince's command to protect the kingdom. But for some reason, after combining the technology of the Twilight Village, it became a little strange. That was because these guys were not riding on horses or chariots. They did not even have a motorcycle with a bucket. Instead, they were riding on a steam locomotive driven by a huge and cumbersome internal combustion engine. The steam trains were pitch black in color and had the crude beauty of classical style. The sharp horns protruding from the bottom were dyed scarlet by the color of blood. There were no tracks, but its mobility was not inferior to that of a tank. Its speed was astonishing. The most eye-catching thing was that there was a strange round face that looked very much like a friendly puppy hanging in front of him. The style was extremely strange. Huaisha felt that something was wrong. But in short, becoming stronger was the right thing to do. As for the rest, there was no need to care too much about it. And when 6 steam locomotives barged into the battlefield with a high-pitched whistle, the heavy cannons were raised and slowly aimed at the formation in front. The alchemists on the opposite side finally could not take it anymore under the continuous refresh of their worldview. They were completely subdued by Huaisha's unique style. They took off their glasses with trembling little hands. I admit defeat. On the Sunmaker's throne, Huaisha shrugged and praised. You fought well. Following his words, the giant deer that was the embodiment of compassion appeared behind his opponent. It glanced at him coldly before disappearing without a sound. So, in the collapsed tower, only a skeleton that instantly decayed was left. It dissipated in the wind. Soon, with the roar of the fog, a new piece of land was pieced together into Huaisha's territory. This time, the restrictions of the land were quite strange. It was as if the land near the furnace had its own high-temperature environment, and the concentration of abyssal sediment in the dilapidated temple was astonishing. Because of the interference brought about by Publius's mysterious instrument of creation, Helios was now completely hellish, and the land formed more or less had some negative effects. The reason for its formation was often related to the distortion of the land itself. At the same time, it would also have a huge impact on the outcome of the battle. Before this, the only time Huaishur had been defeated in the showdown before the gods was when he fought with others for the broadcasting center of Helios. It could be said that he had fallen into a ditch and could not climb out, because the restriction of that piece of land was that singing was prohibited. It even prohibited all rhythmic sounds that could be called melodic. For others, the restriction was completely insignificant, but for a disaster musician like Huaishur, it was simply the most desperate disaster. The performance method that had long been integrated into his instincts brought about the crisis of sudden death in an instant. Every heartbeat and every breath was a countdown to death. The technique that had made him famous in the past had become the reason for his defeat, and Huaishur could not spit out a mouthful of old blood in his throat. This was F***king beyond the ordinary level of absurdity. And now, he finally saw an even more ridiculous restriction. Drinking was prohibited here? What's going on? Huaishur scratched his head. It's one thing to catch people in a strange dream, to pay their respects, but not to sing or drink. Is this the rhythm of forcing people to observe mourning? Normal operation, Tangi's mocking voice sounded. The essence of Publius's mysterious instrument of creation is to try to trace back to the old days of Helios, reverse the death of the gods, and create the birth of gods. If the death of the emperor was only to prevent people from singing and drinking, the mortals would probably wake up laughing in their dreams, right? Helios itself was once the territory of the gods, and after combining with the vision of the death of the gods, such restrictions could not be more normal. If you ask me, you've hit the jackpot this time. Hurry up and check if there's anything else that can be used. Something that can be used? Huaishur raised his head and looked around. Countless giant cylindrical cauldrons stood in great numbers, and the air was filled with a pungent, sour, and rotten smell. Many of the cauldrons had cracked, and all kinds of strange liquids leaked out from within. The messy corpses on the ground had long been corroded into bones. He walked among them, distinguishing the functions of the instruments and the solutions. Storage, sedimentation, filtration, and sifting. This was one of the pre-processing centers for alchemy materials in Helios. Its function was to perform the preliminary processing, decomposition, and storage of most liquid materials. Even after the chaos, most of the instruments were still operating. But compared to what was truly important, these were only insignificant things. At this moment, in the center of the processing center, the deep pool that looked like a lake was still being stirred endlessly by the huge, swinging arm, and all kinds of essence from the abyss were being extracted from it. Under layers of sifting, the surging streams were gathered in the giant cauldrons in all directions through a network that extended in all directions. When the huge instrument was operating and several streams converged, all kinds of complicated potions could be formed without the need for refining in a furnace. This was simply an alchemy production line that was like a cornucopia. The incomparably precious silver blood potion in the present realm was almost gathered into a river here, and there was no end to it. The blood of the ancients from a higher level was piled up like a mountain here. And finally, after layers of processing, mixing, and extraction, the ripples of the countless streams would collide, and wisps of silver-white mist would rise up and gather in the large urn in the center. Huaishur walked to the side and looked down. The silver spring water in the large urn was as smooth as a mirror, reflecting his sluggish face. He subconsciously reached out, but just as he was about to touch the water, he retracted his hand as if he had been electrocuted. He took a long ladle embedded with jewels and diamonds from the shelf next to him, carefully scooping up a little and bringing it to his face. He carefully confirmed it again and again. He took a deep breath. In an instant, his spirit was lifted. When he poured 2 drops into his hand, he felt a warm current spread through his body and into his soul. A wonderful fragrance lingered at the tip of his nose, intoxicating him and causing his cheeks to turn red. Supply of origin substance. This large urn was actually filled with liquid origin substance that was not inferior to the exclusive supply of the Astronomy Society. Just a few drops from a small ladle had completely replenished Huaishi's origin substance that was lacking because of the forging. He even had a surplus, causing him to enter a strange state of excitement. He was so energetic that he wanted to immediately take off his clothes and run 2 laps in the snow with the sleigh. He subconsciously pulled at his collar, panting, and noticed the abnormality in his body. Even with his resistance, there were signs of solidification. Although it was very subtle, it was still very eye-catching under the illumination of Great Sea Ming's divine mark. Even with Huaishi's poison resistance, there would be abnormalities. If it was a normal person, with just 1 drop, they would have been immediately deformed, right? What is this? He picked up the ladle again in disbelief. What else can it be that can nourish the soul, but also cause people to fall into depravity? Of course, it's the divine wine. Tongji whistled and sighed happily. This is a huge profit, Huaishi. This is the sanctuary of Dionysus. It was once a place on Helios where the god of wine was worshipped as the last territory of the Olympian gods. All the places on Helios corresponded to the gods. After combining with Publius' mystic instrument, this place was almost equivalent to the temple of the god of wine. All the creations naturally received the blessings of Dionysus. The muse's divinity in the broadcast center was not even worthy of carrying his shoes. After all, he was one of the 12 Olympian gods who was once as famous as Apollo. Although the authority of the god of wine Dionysus was not as awe-inspiring as his brothers and sisters, it was still indispensable. Moreover, he was the kind of person who hid his strength and did not bark when he bit people. The Greeks regarded him as the master of revelry and joy because he was the guide of all the souls of the living. With just a thought, he could send people to heaven or hell. He could free people from pain, and he could also intoxicate people with the pleasure of depravity until they were sinful and irredeemable. Just a portion of the god of wine here reflected the dual attributes of sublimation and solidification. Needless to say, this was only the raw material. After further processing, all kinds of wonderful uses could be discovered. It was simply omnipotent. It was a pity that it had now become a solidification curse. It just looked very beautiful. Perhaps before the abnormality in Helios was resolved, it could only be poured into the internal combustion engine of the Dusk Knight's train and be used as a powerful fuel. Just as Huaishi was feeling regretful, beside him, there was a slurping sound. When he turned around in shock, he saw that half of a skeleton had already crawled into the pool without him noticing. Wow, there's so much wine. A certain simple-minded person who did not know what he was drinking looked up with sparkling eyes. Yay! Chapter 878. In the long silence, Huaishi and the skeleton who was soaking happily in the poisonous pool looked at each other. Neither of them seemed to understand why the other was acting so strangely. They looked at each other without saying a word. Huaishi finally coughed dryly and broke the silence. He asked tentatively, "Sai, why didn't you say anything before going down?" The skeleton was stunned for a moment, as if it finally understood something. It was in disbelief. "You're so stingy ago." It widened its dark eye sockets and complained with hurt. "I've already treated you to so much wine. Why can't you even bear to drink so little?" Huaishi couldn't hold back a mouthful of blood. He only felt a pain in his head. Are we talking about the same King thing? He felt terrible all over. "Aren't you afraid of being poisoned?" "Poisoned? How is it poisoned? It's such a good wine." The skeleton looked at the pool it was soaking in puzzlement. It didn't understand what Huaishi meant. It even lowered its head and drank 2 big mouthfuls. "Isn't the taste quite authentic?" In the silence, Huaishi didn't speak. He looked at it with his mouth agape, looking at the wine leaking from the gap of its jaw. As if it had undergone some magical quenching, wisps of pale gold appeared. Like formaldehyde meeting bamboo charcoal, the essence of hell hidden in the divine wine slowly shrank. As the skeleton stirred, it adhered to its skeleton, causing the originally pure white skeleton to appear with faint green veins, which became more and more prominent and lively. The corner of Huaishi's eyes twitched. He felt as if it had become fresher from a corpse that had been dead for a long time. While ago. Look, the skeleton raised its hand, touched its head, and shouted excitedly, "I've grown hair." There was no time to correct the term ago. Huaishir had already seen the scene of strands of golden hair sprouting from the skeleton's head. They grew rapidly from nothing. In the end, they became slender and straight, as bright and pure as golden silk. How terrifying! Huaishir rubbed his eyes hard to make sure that he wasn't hallucinating. The skeleton in front of him had indeed grown hair after soaking in the poisonous wine. It was so tight and firm that it was enough to move a down-and-out male cowherd to tears. The only flaw was that it seemed to only grow in the middle and not the sides. He had turned into a Mohican with the style of a punk. What kind of miraculous principle could cause such a change? Huaishir scratched his head. He felt that the fantastical level of this world had begun to soar again. He could no longer keep up with the changes, especially after he confirmed that the curse in the godly wine had been greatly weakened and was almost completely purified. His gaze towards the skeleton became more passionate. Was this a great Grand Master? Not only could it be used as a stove, it could also be used to brew wine. Love. Half an hour later, beside the wine pool, Huaishir's pot was already hot. The godly wine gradually boiled, emitting a rich fragrance that intoxicated people. In the gradually tumbling water, the skeleton's two arms rested on the edge of the pot, and a hot towel covered its head. After getting into a comfortable position, it let out a carefree moan. Heat up more. Okay. Huaishir added 2 more pieces of firewood. After the godly wine in the wine pool passed through the iron pot, it was completely purified. Then, through a slender conduit, it dripped into Huaishir's water tank drop by drop. In this way, a freshly made poison filter valve was ready. At this moment, in the iron pot, the skeleton enjoyed the long-lost warmth. It held the small cup in its hand and drank a big mouthful. It was so moved that little stars almost appeared in its eyes. "Ago, you are so good to me." In front of the iron pot, Huaishir raised his head, wiped his sweat, and smiled honestly. "Don't mention it. We don't have to be so polite." He casually pulled 2 books from the pile of ancient books beside him. He tore up the valuable ancient books and manuscripts that contained an unknown amount of wisdom and threw them into the fire to maintain the temperature. There was no pity. Anyway, they were not serious books. At first, Huaishir had some expectations for Helios, but after going through some of the alchemist's private collections these days, he found that they were really dirty. It was simply unsightly. It could be said that although it would be unfair to kill all of them, there would be fish that escaped the net if they were killed one by one. Just look at these guys' notes and hamsters to know. If it was not private research on live sacrifice and biological alchemy, it was the data records of various soul experiments. There were also all kinds of methods and precautions for trading with various existences in hell. What's more, there were all kinds of inhumane secret instruments and methods to obtain materials. Those guys had already crossed the boundary of ethics in the vast space and stepped into the category of taboos. They even dared to touch the field of the elements of destruction. In just a few decades, under the guidance of the Pied Piper, the alchemists who monopolized the remnants of the gods had fallen to a jaw-dropping level. At first, they might have just skipped some steps for convenience and used a more radical method. Later, they began to get used to repeatedly testing the edge of the boundary until someone was willing to pay any price for the results. When the bottom line was gone, everyone would fight to be the first to fall. In order to circumvent the restrictions of the 3 major seals, the increasingly crazy alchemists even tried to simulate the environment of old Gaia in the enclosed space of Helios to be closer to the ecology of the Chaos era. It was not a harmless phenomenon like the coral clouds, but an invasive species that would cause endless trouble. It was a poisonous environment that was absolutely incompatible with the current situation. Even if they did not succeed, they still left behind all kinds of scalp-numbing records. The ancient Grand Master Solomon had predicted the 72 sequences of hell, and they had revised 21 of them. They even made up for the creation of the 4 pillars of Asmodeus. how to use the solidification of souls to form 18 different manifestations of the essence of hell. The lords of the 18 hells swallowed and fused with each other, assisted with the secret instruments and stigmata, smelted and transformed, and finally created the authority of Asmodeus, and then became the ruler of hell. Even if it was just a deduction and speculation, it made Huaishi's scalp tingle. The thirst for hell had driven this group of people into madness. Even if they knew that there was a taboo ahead, they still jumped into the abyss with confidence and hope. In the process, there were many alchemists who were used as sacrifices, and there were even some who cut themselves. It was better to burn this kind of thing that would only become a poison if it was kept. Once and for all, in the midst of the burning, Huaishi paused and glanced at the end of the paper in his hand. Unlike the madness and distortion of the content, the handwriting left by the writer was full of certainty. It could be said that the strokes were iron-like, and the power was penetrating the back of the paper. Full of hope, he left a prayer for the future at the end. I am offering a meager sacrifice today in order to reap the fruit of redemption in the future. May the truth have mercy. Seeking salvation and hope in hell, seeking the truth, it was like a cold joke. But this was the essence of alchemy. If he attributed the hell he saw to the erosion of the Pied Piper, he would be underestimating Helios too much. Even if there were no believers of the Pied Piper, it was only a matter of time before Helios lost control. The existence of the Pied Piper, the element of destruction, was nothing more than a catalyst. It caused the existence of an organization to fall into collective fanaticism and extremes, distorted beautiful dreams and ideals into hell and despair, and caused all the huge future to collapse due to its own weight. Those who pursued justice became lunatics who couldn't tolerate any evil in their eyes. Those who longed for the truth burned themselves by playing with fire, and those who expected salvation fell into hell. That was what he was best at. It was as if he had just casually pressed the switch that represented the impulse to self-destruct, and everything began to rapidly change beyond recognition until it fell apart, and its original appearance could no longer be seen. Truth. The skeleton in the iron pot soaked in wine looked at the paper in Huaishi's hand as if it was drunk and couldn't help but sneer. What's the use of truth? It can't be eaten. Huaishi was slightly stunned. He casually threw the broken page in his hand into the fire and looked at the skeleton of Pubris. I thought you would feel the same way. No, my uncle used to think about this stuff all day long. Didn't something happen to him in the end? That's why people with good brains like to think too much. The skeleton, who had been cooked to 90% well, burped happily in the divine wine and concluded, "It's still better to eat and drink." That was great. Huaishi was speechless. You're the skeleton of a great grandmaster. Why didn't you inherit even the slightest bit of the great grandmaster's nature? You only think about eating and drinking. But what he said did make sense. Eating and drinking was indeed good. Who didn't like to live a life of good food every day? Huaishi couldn't help but feel the same way and express his agreement. But the skeleton began to moan and groan. But it's not good to eat and drink too much. You'll run outside and mess around. I remember now. It suddenly slapped its forehead and cried out. Huaishi subconsciously raised his spirits and saw the skeleton look over. It had a head of magical Mohican blonde hair and said to him in a very serious tone, "My father might not be a good person." In a long silence, Huaishi's expression twitched and he nodded with difficulty. "Yes, I can see that." The skeleton waved its hand and emphasized seriously, "No, what I mean is he seems to be messing around outside behind my mother's back." And then she gave birth to a little zombie. Huaishi looked up at the sky and sighed expressionlessly. "Brother, why can't you remember anything useful? Even if you remember a little bit of what you used to do, it will be better than this." He really didn't know what to say. He could only comfort the skeleton with a helpless expression. Look on the bright side. It's not just your family. Maybe all the species in the world are the same. But that's not right. The skeleton became more and more confused. It scratched its blonde hair. "I don't seem to have a father. No, who is my father? He can't be a scum, right? That can't be. The Hermans have always been loyal to our marriage. Huaisha rolled his eyes and planned to take this thing out of the divine wine and dry it first. You don't even have a stomach. How can you drink so much? But the words that jumped out of the skeleton's mouth in the end stunned him. It was unbelievable. Wait, what did you say? The skeleton looked at him blankly. After thinking for a while, it repeated, marriage, the sentence before that. Huaisha widened his eyes and asked word by word, what family did you say you were from? The Hermans? Didn't you just say Herman? Huaisha was so anxious that he wanted to hit the skeleton. I can't remember clearly. The skeleton fell into a state of stupor again. Speaking of which, is my name Pubris or Pavlov? Huaisha rolled his eyes. He was very anxious. He took out the Book of Destiny and repeatedly confirmed that he hadn't heard wrong. The skeleton had indeed said the Hermans. The Hermans? The famous pure-blooded family, the inheritors of the holy name of the Blessed One, a core member of the Roman genealogy. This wasn't the first time Huaisha had heard of it. But Pubris shouldn't be a member of the Hermans. On the contrary, coincidentally, he just happened to know a direct descendant of the Hermans. Even more coincidentally, the other party was above Helios. Isn't this just a coincidence? The senior leader of the Stone Cauldron Society, a legendary alchemist of the Roman genealogy, and a giant who had stood at the peak of alchemy 100 years ago. At the same time, he was the old bastard who had tricked Huaisha into marrying Helios, the great grandmaster, Garland Herman. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but move closer to the skeleton and pick up its skull with both hands. He raised it and looked at it carefully. Big brother, who are you? The innocence in the skeleton's eyes was about to overflow. I don't know either, brother. I'm just a corpse, okay? And I'm only half a body. Don't ask me such a question that's out of my scope. Okay? It picked up the wine cup in its hand, scooped a large cup of wine from the pot, and stuffed it into Huaisha's hand. Come, drink it and you'll be done. It was as if it didn't care whether the friend in front of it was Huaisha or a dog. As for whether it was Pubris or Garland, it couldn't be bothered to care. What was the use of thinking so much? It was better to eat and drink. Chapter 879. Within the gloomy hall, countless translucent faces floated in the alchemy array on the ceiling. The dead souls were reconstructed using origin substances and records, creating a nearly perfect replica of the spirit body. At this moment, countless voices continuously rang out in Hades' ears. Your progress is already too slow. When is this going to end? We need to make changes. Otherwise, we'll suffocate to death. I said a long time ago that we should use Rome's secret methods. The outdated Greek methods won't work. There's no point in going back on our words now. It'll only increase the internal strife. Our talents aren't as good as Pubris. But Pubris doesn't have any energy left. Blood, spirit, body, and bones. After so many splits, does he really still have his original talents? I'll be honest with you. I think creating a god is pretty stupid. You should try my project, huh? The artificial silver, see, can't be controlled at all. It's actually more practical than recreating a remnant evil. If you want to talk about this, I'm not sleepy anymore. Enough. A dignified spirit interrupted the useless bickering and grumbling. The origin substances that flowed between the spirit-body replicas rapidly transmitted the conclusions of their thoughts. The sparks of their thoughts collided and rubbed against each other, finally coming to a conclusion that everyone agreed with. The dignified face of the previous chief descended, looking down at Hades' cold face. Losing the initiative is equivalent to sitting and waiting for death. Hades, you are the chief. You should do something. There was no resentment that came for being poisoned and murdered. There was no brainwashing or modification, nor was there any abuse or torture. These spirits that had been resurrected after death didn't care at all about providing their murderer with wisdom and reference. They didn't even care that they were already dead. Even if they knew that Hades was a follower of the Pied Piper, it didn't matter. The instincts of an alchemist had long since suppressed everything. Curiosity, the desire to research, and the uncontrollable urge to explore Those important parts that made up the spirit were faithfully reproduced. Unlike those mediocre people who died impure deaths, these fanatical seekers of knowledge only needed a few minutes to accept their own deaths. After leaving behind a bit of regret, they began to willingly continue to provide services to the murderer. He held nothing back. They just wanted to see the results. Even if this self-awareness was fake, they still wanted to satisfy this irredeemable impulse. Reality had already proven that Publius's talents were far above theirs. Since the existence of the great Grandmaster was not something they, who were flawed, could stand shoulder to shoulder, then why not accept their own failure and follow the changes to explore a higher realm? They didn't care about the lives of others. They didn't even care about their own lives. Moreover, it was just that he couldn't eat. It wasn't like he couldn't continue his research. He could still pursue new intelligence after death. Wasn't that good? I don't like to act rashly before I get to know my opponent's background. Hades shook his head. The faster you move, the faster you die. At the end of the day, didn't you guys fail because of your own arrogance? Haven't you learned your lesson? His fingers tapped on the armrest of the chair. After muttering to himself for a while, he slowly said, "That martial artist from the Astronomy Society has never been anything to fear. Mikhail's projection is just a facade. He's too far away. He can only maintain that area. He can't do anything else. Don't be fooled. The real threat has never been Mikhail, but the people behind him." He paused for a moment, looked up, and asked, "In today's era, is there anyone else who can activate the showdown of the gods, other than the gods?" There's a 30% chance that it's Mikhail, a 40% chance that it's an unknown divine mark, and a 19% chance that it's from Helios. Among them, the chance that a real god will descend here is less than 1%. The previous first seat quickly came to the most objective conclusion. The gods repel each other. Hades, it's like two stars that won't easily get close to each other. After Apollo's mystic instrument of creation was activated, it's impossible for another god to enter Helios. Or rather, it's because Publius's creation of divinity was too successful that it was used by his opponent. The representative of the souls gave a final warning. "It's the most dangerous time. We have to respond." "I know." Hades tapped his assistant and said calmly, "I know." At that moment, in the holy temple of Hades, the king of the underworld, under the gaze of countless souls, the huge array in the center of the hall lit up once again. After offering a huge number of sacrifices and countless offerings, liquid gold rose from the cauldron, breaking through the blood and turning into a descending embryo. An endless amount of darkness seeped out from within. Then, a tall and thin figure appeared from within. It was dark all over, covered in layers of gold ornaments adorned with lapis lazuli and rubies. Its vertical eyes slowly looked up. It sniffed the air and frowned in displeasure. The stench of an alchemist. The one who wore the crown from hell looked up at Hades and mocked. "Are you the contractor? Do you expect to bind me with such a thing?" He opened his mouth slightly and blew gently. In an instant, the wind of decay from time broke through the layers of boundaries and turned into a torrent, rushing forward. Soon, it disappeared in front of the scepter in Hades' hand. The witness of the contract is the supreme one who blows the voice of truth. Hades asked expressionlessly, "How dare you offend his majesty? There is no second master." "Watch your words, jester." A cold light appeared in the beastly vertical eyes of the one who wore the crown. "I only serve the Lord of Decay, the immortal king of Wither. This is also the permission of the king of Wither." Hades raised the scepter again and pointed it at his face. "Demon of Sumer's hell, the solidified evil spirit, Gala, the traitor. I command you in your name, obey me." He paused for a moment and revealed a malicious smile. "Or you can make another choice." Under the restriction of the contract, the ancient solidified one fell silent. Countless phantoms appeared in the strange luster flowing on the gold ornaments. All of them were the twisted faces of the dead. After a long time, he slowly looked behind him. In the darkness behind him, a pale face appeared. Shrouded in a pitch-black veil, It was a beautiful face, but it was completely lifeless. Gala had no mood to appreciate this stunning beauty. Instead, he was full of disgust for the pair of empty eyes. It was a lie, a false bubble, just like the promises of all the jesters. There was no truth to it, but at the same time, it was full of threat and malice. "I will abide by the contract, alchemist." Gala withdrew his gaze and chose to obey the authority of the Supreme One. "Give me weapons, give me blood, give me war. Finally, keep your doll away from me. Then, happy working with you." Hades raised his hand and once again made an inviolable contract. As the darkness dissipated, countless huge shadows emerged from the end of the hall like a tide. They looked up with their scarlet eyes. They could not wait any longer. "I've prepared the war you want, Gala." Hades smiled and told the leader of a large group who was loyal to death, "Before the war is over, learn to get along with Pandora." At the same time, in another huge hall, the visitor put down his teacup and picked up his cigar again. "I have a feeling that you are in big trouble, Garland. This has nothing to do with you," is Zector. In front of him, the Grand Master, shrouded in an invisible flame, said coldly, "You just need to do what you want to do. You don't need to care about other things." Now even little Garland looks down on me. Izzy scratched his head awkwardly and was full of concern. "Am I not here to care about the health of the younger generation? Blood fever is such a troublesome disease. Can the body still withstand it? More than enough." Garland lowered his eyes and stared at the hot blood flowing from his fingertips. Droplets of blood dripped onto the ground, burning patches of scorch marks. "Then, I will not disturb you." Izzy raised her hand and put on her hat. She got up and patted her pants. She politely said goodbye. "Since you invited me to tea, how about I give you a prophecy?" "Not interested," Garland replied coldly. "No matter what happens, everything is part of fate, isn't it? You are so similar to Publius." Izzy laughed. "Who says not?" Garland retracted his gaze. Zector, the demigod from America, the high priest who inherited noble blood and holy will, had disappeared without a trace. In the silence, the dazed Rachel next to him opened his eyes as if he had just woken up from a dream. "What happened?" he asked, puzzled. "What?" "Nothing happened." Garland stared at the fog in the distance. He looked at the tower burning with the light of the sun. It was as if he could see the embryo of God brewing in it. The embryonic form of God was also looking at him. Thus, his eyes gradually turned cold. It made his blood run cold. For hours later, Huaishur, who was drinking, playing cards, and singing, suddenly stopped. He was pulled to the top of the eternal frost furnace by an invisible force. He held the cup in his hand in a daze and sat on the throne of the Sunmaker. Only then did he realize that he had been so high on eating and drinking that he did not see that the countdown had ended. Before he could react, a new round of battle began. When the roar burst out from the fog again, a ferocious outline appeared in front of Huaishur. Surrounded by colorful RGB lights, a tower rose from the ground like a dragon. The broken dog that had disappeared for a long time appeared in front of him. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. He did not expect that he would be the one fighting himself this time. Then he saw countless intersecting roads extending out from the fog, covering the entire battlefield. Hundreds of magnificent bronze mirrors that towered into the clouds stood in the middle, slowly rotating and reflecting the complicated and changing reflections. The complicated and strange paths were like messy wool that twisted together, turning into a dead knot that could not be untied. Just looking at it made one dizzy. The three forks overlapped and became a strange maze. No one could find a beginning and end of it. And this time, the rules of the venue were so strange that no one could understand them at all. Reversal of gains and losses, what kind of rule was this? Was it to restrict alchemy? Huaishur looked up blankly and looked at the opposite side. Then, he saw himself sitting on the throne of the Sunmaker. Huaishur revealed an evil and wild smile. Saliva and tongue were thrown out from the corner of his mouth. It flowed all over the ground. Chapter 880. Looking at his silly appearance, Huaishur suddenly felt like he was looking into a mirror. But when he lowered his head and saw his sharp claws, and when he looked back at his blade-like scales and tail, he scratched his nose, creating a large amount of blazing sparks. Huaisha finally came to a realization. Oh my God, I've become a dog again. What the hell? What's going on? What's going on? Huaisha did not feel good at all. It was fine that he had inexplicably become a dog, but the problem was that the dog had become him. Now, in front of Huaisha's eyes on the tower, he was squatting on the Sunmaker's throne. He raised his legs and swept his ears. After a satisfied yawn, he stuck out his tongue and licked the skull of the skeleton. Enough, brother, enough. Don't King lick me anymore. Huaisha looked at his image rapidly collapsing. He remembered that tears were about to come out of the dog's head. He felt sad. Tangi, save me. Tangi was stunned for a long time. She looked at him and the dog with schadenfreude, and could not help but roll around in laughter. Silly boy, I can't help you even if I want to. What's going on? Isn't this the rule of the land? Tangi wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. Reversal of gains and losses. So this is what it is? Ha ha, ha ha, I see. Don't keep me in suspense. Huaisha barked. Immediately, Huaisha on the opposite side barked as well. It seemed to be scolding someone. Well, to put it simply, you seem to have won the lottery again, ha ha ha. Tangi could not stop laughing. 3 forks in the road, maze, night, secret, and door. I think I know what's going on. Huaisha, this is the temple of the goddess of witchcraft, Hecate. Hecate, a hidden existence in Greek mythology, was a goddess rarely known to anyone other than the 12 main gods. In reality, his background was shockingly great. There were many scholars and alchemists who suspected that this goddess was just a puppet of another god system. Tracing back and analyzing, it could be found that this goddess once had the authority of the sky, the earth, and the sea. She even vaguely had a huge influence in hell. Now that I think about it, she was really a difficult woman to deal with. Although she was an autistic person with social phobia, it was troublesome to communicate with her. No matter what I said, she wouldn't listen. She was simply the ultimate paranoia. Later, when I found out that she died, I sympathized with her for a long time. Tangi seemed to have accidentally dropped another important piece of news, but Huaisha, who had turned into a dog, didn't want to listen to it anymore. So what does this have to do with me turning into a dog? Although it's a long story, let's keep it short. Tangi thought for a moment, then happily explained, Do you know why the gods are working together? What do you mean? Simply put, why do we need to form a divine system? Huaisha, have you ever thought about this? Tangi said, Imagine if you were a god, born with power and not eating the food of mortals. Although there is a limit to your lifespan, it is still so long that you can't see the end of it in a short period of time. If you have time to eat and drink, why do you have nothing better to do and work with others? Nothing better to do. Huaisha scratched his head. His paws rubbed against the dog's head, making a sharp sound. But soon he realized the answer. Destiny? Yes. Imagine that you, Huaisha, are a kindergarten Annie who has to take care of children every day. But you are also a kindergarten security guard and have no time to do anything else. At this time, someone comes to you and tells you that he can help you protect the kindergarten, but you have to take my child with you. What would you think? You mean it's a win-win situation? Bingo, Tangi snapped her fingers with her little wings. If there's such a thing as a social history between the gods, then this is probably the embryonic form of a divine system. Everyone has their own strengths and needs. In order to fulfill their destiny and satisfy their own desires, they choose to work together. A chef, a kindergarten teacher, a security guard, and a handyman ant work together. They form a kindergarten and compete with other kindergartens for business. Tangi smiled meaningfully. The competition between the gods is also quite fierce. There was a period of time when everyone was seriously involved in the internal affairs. This is a digression. In short, the existence of a divine system is based on the union between the gods. Take Olympus, for example. Everyone has their own division of labor, and at the same time, the internal struggle is fierce. From the first generation to the second generation, the second generation to the third generation, until the third generation completely established a stable structure. After killing his father, Zeus and Poseidon reached an agreement with his unlucky brother Hades. Zeus, as the lord of the sky, had supreme authority. Poseidon ate the biggest piece of meat and ruled the ocean, while the unlucky Hades could only work with Nyx to suppress the revival of chaos. After he went to hell, he became a black glove that did the dirty work for the gods. In short, Zeus became the CEO of Olympus. Poseidon was in charge of finance. Hades was in charge of risk control and internal elimination. Hera, the head of the audit department, Hephaestus, the head of the equipment department and warehouse manager, Hermes, the head of the information department, and the three Fates were in charge of human resources. The head of the R&D department was Hestia, Zeus's sister in name. The real controller was Lady Hecate, the goddess of concealment. Tangi finally revealed the puzzle. In Olympus, Hecate and Hestia controlled the witchcraft and magic of the old era. In the present, it is one of the origins of alchemy. After hearing this, Huaishur fell into a long daze. After a long time, he could not help but become angry. But what does this have to do with me turning into a dog? I'm almost there. Can't you wait a moment? Tangi calmly flapped her little wings. The authority that Hecate has is sacrifice and dedication. If we use the term alchemy to describe it, then it is one of the basic rules of modern alchemy. You win some, you lose some. What she is good at is reducing losses and increasing results, or achieving results that could not be achieved by multiplying losses. This is the meaning of the reversal of gains and losses, Huaishur. Tangi said with a faint smile, "Sometimes what matters is not what you gain, but what you lose." Huaishur was dumbfounded. He lowered his head and looked at the dog's head in the mirror. What did I lose? Humanity. But then his expression stiffened. He looked at himself, who had a silly look on his face, and faintly came to a realization. You mean, that stupid dog is the price I paid for losing it? From the perspective of alchemy, this is true, Huaishur. Tangi chuckled. Don't tell me that the current you isn't the result of many sacrifices? Everyone who wants to grow must experience setbacks and pain, and must give up some things. This is what the so-called adults are like. From the perspective of alchemy, don't you think that after going through the tempering of the furnace of fate and abandoning the naivety of the past, you forge your current self? In your origin equipment, Bichimos represents pain. It combines with the beastly side of your nature and represents your qualifications after solidifying. It can be said that it is the embodiment of your beastly nature. Although your beastly nature is the same as your true self, it is always silly and cute. Ha ha! If other alchemists were here, they would at most find that the price they had to pay for their alchemy would multiply, and their alchemy would become uncontrollable. But the one who was matched with this arena is you. No, it should be said that it is precisely because of you that you are matched with this arena, right? In the secret ritual of today's showdown before the gods, all karma will be magnified thousands of times. You might have been favored by Hecate's divinity. Everything is a link of fate, isn't it? This was the reversal of gains and losses. The results of alchemy and the price paid had been switched. Huaishur, who was the result, and Bichimos, who was the price, had been inconceivably swapped. Huaishur seemed to have vaguely grasped something in his heart, but when he thought about it, he couldn't figure it out. But he couldn't help but inwardly breathe a sigh of relief. At best, this was just a restriction brought about by the arena. Once the showdown was over, it would naturally be swapped back. But the problem now was, how was he going to fight? Huaishur raised his head and happened to meet the eyes of Huaishur. Just like the malevolence and cruelty in Bichimo's eyes, Huaishur, who was sitting on the throne of Sunmaker, had a chilling glint in his eyes that made people shudder. A strong fighting spirit rose from between the two towers. It stirred the clouds. At that moment, the war had begun. 20 minutes later, on the battlefield, the park guards roared and bellowed at the lizard giant that was close at hand. The lizard giant waved its hand and panted heavily. Behind it, The army of 10,000 roared with all its might. Holy! Snatched the landlord. Holy! Don't snatch. Holy! Double. Holy! Super double. Only the dumbfounded skeleton sitting in the middle looked at the cards in his hand and scratched his Mohican blonde hair. His face had long been covered with tinfoil strips. This game is so complicated. How do I play it? Just like that, the 5th round of the Helios Landlord Tournament began again. At the side, Wrath, who was so bored that he was lying on the ground, glanced at Compassion beside him and threw a glance, as if asking, "Are you stupid?" Compassion gnawed on the poisonous grass under his feet, thought for a moment, and nodded. To be honest, he was indeed stupid. I feel like someone is scolding me? On the Dragon Tower, Huaishir raised his paw and scratched his dog head, puzzled. But then, his movements stopped in place as he felt a violent tremor engulfing the whole of Helios. The earth roared. A terrifying, loud noise accompanied by a blazing light rose from the distant fog into the sky. After tearing everything apart, it surged into the sky. The countless blood-colored lights, like burning flames, converged and turned into a wriggling abstract hand, reaching toward the darkness of the universe. Little by little, it once again challenged the sun hanging high in the sky. In an instant, a vision shrouded the whole of Helios. The upheaval came suddenly. Huaishir looked up, stunned, and his tongue stuck out. "Oh my God, Tangi, come out and see God." Tangi didn't say anything. It was just that her expression gradually became subtle. What was this? Should I say, as expected of a Grandmaster? Chapter 881. Half an hour ago, on the other side of Helios, an ethereal tower made of intertwined light and a blood-colored bone tower were facing each other from a distance. It was just like a battle between gods and demons. The sloppy man leaned back in his chair and drank wine. As one of the splits of Pubris, he represented the existence of the Grand Master's soul. Opposite him was Hades, who looked calm. They were not at daggers drawn. There was no killing intent between them. "That was fast, Hades. Looks like those third-rate alchemists aren't useless after all." The drinking alchemist commented on his former colleagues. He looked down on them, but there was no mockery or arrogance in his words. He was just telling the truth calmly. Even the translucent souls beside Hades did not object. Those who played with words were destined to miss the true essence of alchemy. Alchemists who had reached this level knew where their limits were. For the Grand Master, they were no different from trash. There was no reason for him to be angry just because he told the truth. They were already dead. With their abilities and wisdom, this was the limit they could reach. With the support of Hades' temple, they managed to interfere with the operation of the showdown of the gods, with great difficulty, barely bringing forward the duel between Hades and Pubris by 10 rounds. And this was with Pubris' cooperation. "Be patient, Pubris," Hades said. "If you want to succeed, you need some time." As he spoke, the door under the tower opened with a bang. Amid the gushing blood, a figure covered in luxurious golden ornaments slowly walked out. There were 2 curved scythes at his waist, and his scarlet eyes glanced at his opponent. On the other side of the battlefield, there was a silent, burly giant. Hercules. The sound of metal clashing suddenly burst out. Sparks jumped out from the void, and the high-pitched screeching sound of metal instantly spread out. Gala had unsheathed a scythe at some point, but Hercules still did not move. He just silently looked at his opponent, who was provoking him. Silently, a gap appeared on the scythe, and Gala's eyes turned gloomy. He put away his weapon. He just spat unhappily. A second-rate product made by God, really useless. He didn't know if he was talking about his weapon or his opponent. Even though he had received Hades' warning in advance, he still ignored the taboo and provoked the enemy. In the end, he returned empty-handed, which made the death follower who was intoxicated in slaughter and blood extremely unhappy. He couldn't fight to his heart's content. It was not satisfying at all. Alchemists, in silence, he slowly moved aside, revealing the darkness behind him. In that darkness, under the protection of countless monsters, a girl with a black veil stood silently waiting. Jia Luo, crooked his finger, indicating for the puppet to come forward. Then, he grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. He pushed her to the center of the arena. "Hurry up," Gala urged impatiently. Hercules raised his head and looked up. After getting a signal from Pubris, he got up from the ground, slowly took off his weapon and shield, and threw them on the ground. Only a black box was left behind. Step by step, he walked forward. The strange aura hidden in the box was so strong. Even if it only existed, it caused the surrounding scene to distort. The darkness wriggled and coiled around the box, turning into a layer of fog that drifted with the wind. Illusory laughter and crying came from the dark fog. It was filled with the aura of all disasters and chaos in the world. The corner of Gala's eyes twitched, as if she recognized what it was. She unhappily took a step back, then another step back. She pinched her nose, unable to bear the stench left behind by the gods. Just like that, Hercules stepped forward and put the small box into Pandora's hand. In an instant, all the strange phenomena disappeared. It was as if everything just now was an illusion and had never existed. But the girl holding the box clearly became more lively, as if she had a trace of life. She was just an android created by alchemists, an empty shell with a mark of God. But at this moment, when the eyes under the black veil moved, they glowed with an incredible spirit. It was so tempting. "Open it, Pandora." Hades lowered his eyes, and a fanatical light appeared in his eyes. "I offer this unique sacrifice to the gods who are paying attention to this place," he said. "This is your fate." At that moment, under the command and control of alchemy, the two completely different marks of God created by Grandmaster Publius and Chief Hades of Helios merged into one. The humanoid relic named Pandora and the box named Disaster merged into one, forming a terrifying tide that reversed the general trend and subverted all the rules. Under the veil, there was suddenly an ear-piercing shriek. It was like a child who had died prematurely and a woman who was about to give birth. It contained pain and despair, as if it was real, and it ravaged every inch of the eardrum. It made Hercules step back, unable to resist the strong soul poison in the voice. It was a poison called hope. At this moment, 2 lines of blood and tears snaked down from Pandora's eyes, and in her hands, the dark box cracked inch by inch. The taboo sealed in the darkness gushed out. It was not disaster, nor was it terror, but a pure golden light. It was so bright and so glorious, as if it was the epitome of all the beauty in the world, and it made people yearn for it. Just looking at it made people want to rush forward regardless of their own safety, and it was difficult to restrain their greed. They wanted to get it. They wanted to get it. It was an apple that looked like it was carved out of gold. At this moment, along with Pandora's movements, terrifying flames rose from her body, incinerating every inch of her body and flesh. However, she seemed to be unable to feel any pain. Behind the burning black veil, there was the first smile since she was born. It was so happy, but also so vicious. Vengeance against the high and mighty paragons. She finally spoke, and her soft voice echoed above Helios, resounding in every inch of space and echoed in every temple, replaying the prelude that had once caused the turmoil of the gods. With this humble offering to the most beautiful goddess at that moment, Pandora was completely burned out. Instead, the terrifying light emitted by the golden apple soared into the sky, tearing apart all the mystic instruments and shrouding the entire Helios. What was triggered was a riot that completely overturned the showdown of the gods. The love and hatred between the gods were replayed once again. Countless high walls of fog dissipated, and the bells in all the temples rang again. The symbols of the gods, who were originally harmonious on Olympus, suddenly became alienated and cold at this moment. The balance was broken. Under the curse of the gods, Hera, Hestia, Demeter, Athena, Aphrodite, Artemis, Persephone, Hecate, even the 3 Graces, the 9 Muses, and all the goddesses of Olympus were instinctively rioting under the temptation of the golden apple. They attacked each other, repelled each other, racked their brains, just to monopolize the meaningless bright light. This was a disaster that existed in history and was even predestined, the fuse that triggered a huge war that swept across the entire Mediterranean world. After 100 years, it was replayed in the vast space. After a long period of planning and brewing, the Grand Master Publius finally launched a counterattack against the invaders. In an instant, the showdown of the gods collapsed without any attack. Then, let us challenge the gods again. In the Tower of Light, the prototype of God, who was operating in the fierce light, looked up and whispered, just like 100 years ago, just like 200 years ago. After experiencing countless failures and setbacks, after enduring a long period of imprisonment and torture, after suffering endless humiliation and disgrace, he once again launched an attack towards an unattainable realm. This was the destiny and dream passed down by countless alchemists for hundreds of years. One day, I will master the truth and surpass the gods. At this moment, along with his words, the blood-red hand tore apart the mystic instruments of the showdown of the gods and stretched out its palm toward the sun and the sky. And all the showdown stopped. The participants looked at each other blankly, not knowing what had happened. They only saw the blood-red meandering in the field and converging toward the giant tower of light. Among them was Huai Shi, who had unknowingly returned to his human form. "Oh my God, Tangi, come out and see the gods." But Tangi did not go to see them. Unknowingly, she had disappeared without a trace. It was as if she had fallen into another sudden dream. She did not resist. Instead, she obeyed the call of that will, passing through the ancient times and arriving at the dazzling palace. When she raised her eyes again, she was already sitting in the center of the long table. She was like an uninvited guest who had suddenly appeared at a joyous banquet, causing the original laughter and happiness to disappear without a trace. "Oh my, how have you been, everyone?" Tangi looked up and looked at the blurry figures around her. Finally, she looked at the clearest old man at the head of the table and smiled. "How have you all been?" At this moment, the burly old man with white hair and beard held a wine cup, raised his head nonchalantly, and drank it in one gulp. "They are all obsolete goods who have been dead for God knows how many years. What's good or bad about them?" The remnant that was once known as Zeus calmly put down the wine glass. "Instead, it's more complicated to see the enemy of the past dancing in front of our graves. Really, they're all dead. Why can't you be more generous?" Tangi waved her hand indifferently and looked around. "Aren't you going to give me a cup? You are so cold. This is the banquet of Olympus. Outsiders are not welcome." "It's okay. I brought my own." Tangi turned her hand, and a teacup with a pink pig's head printed on it appeared. She shook it proudly. "My contractor bought it for me. Are you jealous?" In an instant, the blurry figures around her looked at her strangely. It was as if they had seen a ghost. "Contractor? You? Are you serious?" Chapter 882. The atmosphere suddenly turned weird. It was as if they saw a heinous serial killer coming home to cook dinner for a kitten. They even hugged the kitten and meowed with it. Even if they were remnants of the past, the only remaining reflections of the gods, those blurry silhouettes could not help but reveal astonishment and bewilderment. It was like seeing a ghost. Tangi did not care about those gazes. She opened a can of happy water, poured it into the glass, and put in a straw. After taking 2 sips of the tea in a relaxed manner, he asked. Then, back to the topic, she said, "You have all been dead for so many years. Do you still want to be my stumbling block?" At this point, she showed a kind smile. "As a beautiful and kind big sister who loves peace the most, I really do not want to touch the ashes of my acquaintances. But if you insist on not giving me face, I have no other choice but to burn you." The joyful atmosphere disappeared without a trace and was replaced by hostility. The gods' murderous intent intertwined with each other, making the sweet wine bitter. There were no bubbles in the happy water, and it turned into a greasy syrup. At the top of the banquet, a low voice sounded. "The current you? Forget it." Zeus poured away the wine and said, "What else can you get from the fight between the phantoms other than destruction? We did not intend to stop you." But you stopped me, didn't you? You changed the rules of the showdown of the gods. Tangi reminded them with a blank expression. You chose to stand against me, just like in the past. Even after so many years, you dead things can still dream here, and it's all thanks to me. In the end, you choose to bite the hand that feeds you and make others feel bad? Are you even human? It is not the first time that Olympus has repaid kindness with ingratitude. Is this rare? Besides, we are gods. Isn't it a bit too harsh to ask us to be human? If I remember correctly, our relationship was never friendly. No, it should be said that we hated each other as much as the sea. Zeus didn't try to hide his actions at all. He just calmly told her, since this place is in front of the gods, then the duel should be fair. We're just fulfilling our responsibilities. Instead, you're standing on the side of your favored one, aren't you? Tangi's expression suddenly turned serious as she raised a finger. Correction, it's contractor, not favored. What's the difference? Zeus was puzzled. Of course there is. Don't think that everyone is like you, okay? You Olympians change wives like shut-ins, changing paper dolls. You want to mess around with a beautiful heifer. Whenever you meet a good-looking boy, you want to take care of him. Our Dongxia is very serious. Speaking of this, the corner of her mouth curled up into a sneer. Besides, don't think that I don't know that you Olympians are a bunch of trashy entertainers. In the end, you just want to see Troy again, right? You're already dead. Why do you still like to mess around? Zeus shrugged indifferently. He didn't feel guilty at all. Instead, he asked in a self-righteous manner, don't you want to? He paused for a moment, and his smile became more and more strange. Or, as a goddess, don't you care who gets the golden apple? Would you be interested in a boring result that has long been destined? Tangi raised her finger and pulled a strand of brocade-like black hair behind her shoulder. She calmly asked, isn't it natural for a good woman like me to get the golden apple? After that, she paused for a moment and looked around. There shouldn't be any playboy who likes to mess around with me, right? No way, right? No way, right? Sister Raven is under a lot of pressure. Can you let Sister Raven take it first? As soon as she said that, half of the vague silhouettes cast hostile and hateful gazes in her direction. They couldn't restrain themselves. Those distant voices were full of anger, but it was difficult for them to travel through time to reach this place. The dream was too thin to bear anymore. Moreover, there was not much divinity left in them. They couldn't even show their original faces. Only their instincts remained. They were no different from the clay statues in the temple. Only Zeus, the king of the gods, as the symbol of Olympus, could temporarily break free from the state of annihilation and arrive here in a clear state. It was easy to imagine how complicated his feelings were when he saw his former opponent jumping around and dancing on his family's grave. As for Tangi, after drinking the wine from the small cup, she had already picked up the fruit plate on the table and started eating. She was smacking her lips happily. She was also sighing. This is the taste, authentic. Ah, that's right. A family should be neat and tidy. She threw grapes in her mouth and looked at the only empty seat at the banquet. Why is Apollo not here when so many people are here? Didn't he die a long time ago? Zeus drank his wine and said calmly, killed by your own hands. Sigh, it's all in the past. When we were young, we didn't know anything. It's normal to make mistakes. I was still a child at that time. Look, I've already let it go. Why can't you guys let it go? She was brazenly provoking the former gods. She was not worried that they would attack her out of anger. Tangi tilted her head, spat out the grape seed in her mouth, and said casually, speaking of which, you guys should be thanking me. The corner of her mouth curled up, and she no longer concealed her mockery. I'm the great benefactor who saved him from the same fate as you guys. The cold winter wind, the cold moonlight as sharp as an arrow, the roar of the god of war, and the hostility of the judge at that moment. Under this humiliation, the projection of the Olympian gods appeared blazing scarlet. Zeus's eyes flickered with a flash of fury. Do you want to start a war? The former king of gods asked coldly. You came to Helios without our permission. Now, we have hosted you and invited you to the banquet, and you have only brought mockery and humiliation. Our remaining bones have not decayed to the point of no return. If you want to start a war, you can just say it. No. Isn't this your own humiliation? Tangi held her cup coldly. You destroyed everything you created with your own hands. Because of your greed, you have fallen to this extent. Don't you allow me, the one who cleaned up the mess, to complain? Why do you think you can still keep your temples? Why are you still here? Zeus, if it weren't for the fact that Helios is still useful, do you think I would waste my time talking to you? Tangi raised her eyes and calmly told all the gods here, you have only yourself to blame for what happened to you. From a moment you wanted to abandon this world to get rid of your destiny, you were destined to end up like this. The White Crown King has seen the risks of this. He warned you, but no one listened. He could only go far away and cut ties with you. In the end, he was still implicated by you and lost his integrity in his later years. She said, that's what they call self-reaping. Not only the Olympian gods here, but also from Rome to Egypt, from America to Doomsday. In her opinion, the gods who had fallen, without exception, had only themselves to blame. This was the consequence of placing hope in hell. Was there a mistake in seeking a future in the abyss? This was what Tangi did not tell Huaishur. The latter half of the so-called social history of the gods, the inducement of the fall of the gods hundreds of years ago. The divinity born from the pillar of God's marrow betrayed the destiny, and the gods who ascended from the present realm betrayed their duties. They were unwilling to live a mere 1,000 years, unwilling to be restrained by destiny. The insatiable greed in human nature became the source of motivation for countless explorations through bloodline, through favor, through grace, through command and punishment. They wanted to break free from the shackles. Therefore, there were many demigods, and the power of miracles was passed down to the mortals. Therefore, the existence of the genealogy was formed, contending with each other, killing each other, and changing. Rome, Dongsha, Egypt, India, America, the war spread, engulfing every inch of the present realm. The floods and disasters caused by the war brought the whole world to the brink of destruction several times. Even if the wise tried to save the world, it was still in vain. All the efforts they put in were just a drop in the bucket. Until half of the gods fell because of this. The remaining survivors learned from the painful experience and tried to find a second way out of the dispute, since the war could not achieve the goal. Therefore, the only path left was to join forces. The first to make a change was the Pantheon. The three Thunder Fathers of Rome, Greece, and Northern Europe were the first to form an alliance. Since the existence of the gods was to share the destiny, why not unite more? Similarly, in order to obtain more correction points, why not be more straightforward and enrich the destiny on the same existence? Whether it was thunder, the sun, the moon, wine, art, punishment, guarding, war, benevolence, fertility, cursing, hunting, planting, all of them were gathered into one. It was as if the mortals had pooled their funds to invest in a company. Several enterprises had joined together to form a genuine monopoly group. Long before the term syndicate was born in economics, its physical form had already appeared in the hands of the gods. All authority was gathered together as the means of production. Divine grace and divine power were given to non-existent legal persons. In this way, an idol that did not exist in the world was created. A so-called omniscient and omnipotent public account, and its owners, the angels. The Holy Spirit genealogy was born because of this. It was an unprecedented gamble, and then he obtained an unprecedented success. More and more gods joined in, abandoning war and choosing a win-win situation. There were even people who followed suit and started a new business. After the first person ate the crab, all kinds of new ideas emerged one after another. The gods hidden behind the scenes were like shareholders in the board of directors. They received a steady stream of correction points dividends and obtained the crucial freedom. It was simply a golden age that was as beautiful as heaven. The whole world was developing rapidly, and the entire realm was growing rapidly. Just like the non-existent Eden, there was milk and honey in the river, figs on the trees, and the water was as sweet as wine. Even if someone saw the hidden dangers, no one cared. Even if the actual executor, the selected CEO, the deputy of heaven, issued a warning to the shareholders, the gods who were obsessed with profits still did not care. Even if this intoxicating beauty was rooted in hell, even if the era of flowers in front of them was overdrawing the life of the realm, the law of the conservation of miracles was thrown to the back of their minds. No one cared about how tragic the hell such a huge miracle would create in the abyss, and how huge a reflection would the omniscient and omnipotent empty shell form, and what kind of seeds of disaster would be planted. Just like before the subprime mortgage crisis, every investor would ignore those groundless rumors. The risk was controllable. Everyone said so, but no one cared about the unknown risks. Until one day, the disaster came without warning. After a long gestation, the evil consequences finally sprouted from hell. Overnight, an unprecedented storm spread rapidly and spread over the heads of every participant. Even the innocent who did not participate were not spared. Only a few lucky ones were able to survive because they slept, faked their deaths, and protected, or replaced, and saved at the last moment. The end recorded in the book of Revelation came. The end called apocalypse, solidification, fall, dusk, and the 5 decays of heaven and man. It was no different from death. Under the terrifying gravitational force from the abyss, decay and collapse spread rapidly, returning the will of heaven to the realm, leaving authority in the mortal world and throwing miracles into the human world. After losing everything, the dead gods fell from heaven, passed through the realm, and fell into the abyss. It formed a spectacular and desperate situation called the Fountain of Light. In the deepest part of hell, the last remaining divinity ushered in the final distortion and solidification, conforming to the gravitational force of the abyss and converging into one. So, the reflection corresponding to the omniscient and omnipotent existence, the only true God left in this world, the supreme ruler, was finally born from the deepest hell. With the loud sound of the realm collapsing as the first cry, the element of destruction, known as the rancher, opened its eyes. It looked at the world that belonged to itself. For the first time in its life, it felt the so-called hunger. Until today, the thing that was most qualified to call itself a god in the world was still continuing its unsightly state and continued to devour. The disasters and poisons caused by it were all proof of this sin. Don't you regret it? Tangi looked at the gloomy faces and asked curiously, "Don't you feel ashamed of it?" In the silence, Zeus suddenly laughed softly and mockingly. The old god-king raised his head and drank the cup of cursed wine in one gulp, and asked nonchalantly, "Is there any difference between you and us? Or do you need me to remind you, Tai? Even if you knew in advance that your success would only last for a moment, and that everything you did would lead to betrayal and alienation, would you stop what you did? If the alliance is the sin we committed, then wasn't the war before the alliance caused by you? Isn't that so?" Tangi replied calmly. Lowering her head and looking at the pink porcelain cup in her hand, she laughed self-deprecatingly. "Perhaps this is the price I have to pay." In the silence, no one said anything. In the face of ignorance, the gods themselves kept silent. Chapter 883. At this very moment, above the disc-shaped Helios, the color of blood was surging and converging towards the axis of the entire world, climbing up along the great tower of light of Pubris. Just like the Tower of Babel that had once defied the gods and ascended, the obsession that had been passed down for thousands of years reappeared at this moment. The fruit that countless alchemists had dreamed of was right before their eyes, towards the sky, towards the sun that was high up in the sky. Publius, no, all the alchemists above Helios, the souls that had sunk into hell, the dead that had done nothing, and the wills that were filled with unwillingness and pain, all of them extended their palms towards it. Even after a long period of time, this achievement had gradually lost its meaning. But the mountain was there. Following the path left behind by the gods, the alchemists once again began to climb. Boom! On the Tower of Light, the alchemist who had been drinking stiffened for a moment. He sighed and raised his head to drink the last drop of sweetness. What a pity, he murmured softly, closed his eyes, and silently turned into ashes. His strength had been exhausted, but the next Puberus raised his eyes again and threw himself into the torrent without a care for his own safety, until this excessively scorching flame burned him to ashes. Then the next one, and the next one. Countless split souls, harboring the same obsession, threw themselves into the furnace, using their own ashes to lay the foundation of the tower, causing the giant blood-colored hand to move upwards, upwards, and upwards, until the end, ignoring the burning of the sun, it firmly grasped the incorporeal proof of the gods. Inch by inch, it was pulled downwards. It was as if it was so hungry and thirsty that it wanted to swallow the gods into its stomach. Great spirit of the gods, I will offer all my sacrifices for you. Puberus was burning. Amidst the flames, he continued to split himself and toss them into the furnace. He grinned and laughed maniacally. Please mourn for me. At that moment, in the venue of the Do Diju tournament under the eternal frost furnace, the skeleton holding the cards paused for a moment. It seemed to be puzzled. Something doesn't seem right. It slowly lifted its skull that was plastered with paper slips and looked at the bloody light that pierced the heavens and the earth. Finally, it felt the attraction and calling from the center. Involuntarily, he was pulled away from the ground and floated up into the sky. "Oh my God!" it exclaimed. "I'm about to ascend." Huaisha reacted and quickly stretched out his hand. The rope of sorrow extended and wrapped around his skeleton, holding in place. Bichimos opened its mouth and bit on its head, trying to keep it in place. But the attraction of the same origin was too great, and there was no way to stop it. Soon, cracks appeared on its arm. Then, the great rotor fell off from its body and flew into the sky. Following that, all the bones in his body shattered under the restraints, turning into fragments and dust, flying rapidly towards the giant tower of light. By the time Huaisha reacted, the skeleton had already completely fallen apart and disappeared without a trace. All that remained was a thin strand of origin substance. It was like an illusion. All that was left was a half-transparent skull that emitted a faint glow of origin substance. It was as if the skeleton had suddenly turned into a ghost. It had lost consciousness and entered a state of stupor. What the hell? Huaisha scratched his head, unable to understand. Just as he was trying his best to maintain the skeleton's last bit of origin substance, he heard a warning from behind him. "What you're doing is useless," the old voice said. "Puberilius has retrieved all of its fragments, so it has lost its foundation. Don't you have the divine wine? If you soak it in, it should be able to remain intact. If you keep doing this, I'm afraid it really will fall apart." With this warning, Huaisha's movements were extremely quick. He took out his own water tank and carefully placed the skull inside. As he watched it swim around in the purified divine wine like a goldfish, Huaisha couldn't help but feel a surge of sorrow. Good, this time it was really going to be soaked in wine. As the quintessence of origin substance, the divine wine had the ability to maintain any shattered soul. However, no matter how he looked at it, it looked as if it had been soaked in formalin. "It won't die just like that, right?" Huaisha muttered worriedly. "The divine wine will maintain its existence. As long as you can retrieve what Puberilius took away, your friend will be able to return to its original state." The person who didn't belong here had already come to this conclusion. When Huaisha turned around, he saw an old man leaning on a cane. An uninvited guest, Garland. He couldn't help but frown. "Grandmaster, why have you come?" he asked. "Could it be that you're here to punish me, the arrogant person who has violated the contract?" Beside Huaisha, Bichimos raised its claws and licked the sharp edges of its claws. Sparks flew everywhere. Its gaze suddenly became dangerous. Behind Garland, Rachel's face paled. He couldn't help but take a step back. "There's no need to scare people. Huaisha," Garland said coldly. "Although you've successfully bought us quite a bit of time, the showdown before the gods has already gone out of control. Once Puberilius truly pulls that solar wheel into his array, he will become the new sun god, the true ruler of Helios. If we want to stop him, We have to join forces. Regardless of whether it's rational or beneficial, this is the only choice for you and me. Oh, Huaishir was amused. Back then, you sold me out so thoroughly. Now, you're turning around to talk about cooperation. Isn't the thickness of your skin a little too exaggerated, Grandmaster? I admit that the destruction of the boundary marker was intentional on my part. However, isn't that part of our deal? Garland remained calm, without the slightest hint of guilt. There's no point in returning the son of Leviathan. Rachel is proof of that. After being infiltrated by Publius, Leviathan is even more dangerous than Helios. Everyone who isn't on the contract has nowhere to run. Instead, I'm the one who saved you. What about the key? Huaishir sneered. Letting me use your name to go to Helios is also considered saving me, isn't it? Didn't you ask for it yourself? Garland asked in return. I've even confirmed with you your purpose over and over again. You want to obtain the reflex crystal. However, without my authority, you won't be able to enter the core of Helios at all. I've already warned you of the risks. From the very beginning, it was clearly stated in the contract that both parties must not deliberately harm each other. Now, this clause is still in effect, Huaishir. In his hand was the scroll of the ancient contract. The clause at the top was still glowing, proving that it was true and effective. You can say that I took advantage of a loophole or deceived you. After all, from the very beginning, we never trusted each other at all, right? Garland said. But now, if we want to stop the situation from worsening, we have to join forces. This time, I won't use the contract to bind you in any way. After it's done, everything you get, all the relics of Publius, and even anything that belongs to me, can be given to you. If you're still dissatisfied with me, it doesn't matter if you want to betray me. However, I believe that above the current Helios, we're each other's only choice. You're right. Well said. It's a pity that I'm not interested in your empty promises at all. Huaishir was still cold and unmoved. But you won't let the followers of the Pied Piper carry out their conspiracy in front of your eyes either, will you? Garland said, our interests are the same. We don't need to be friends. We just have a common enemy. He said, even if it's just this, I believe that we already have the foundation to join forces. In the silence, Huaishir looked at him silently and didn't speak. After a long time, he laughed mockingly. He had to admit that this old man had grasped his bottom line and was well aware of his choice. Garland might be more suitable to be an intermediary or a broker than an alchemist. He could always come up with reasons that others couldn't refuse. He could always control the situation, see the most important things clearly, and control the rhythm. He could always make others run in circles. He could always succeed. I have to admit that what you said makes a lot of sense. Your proposal is very wise. Your determination is admirable, and you've successfully convinced me. Huaishir raised his hand and applauded in admiration, but his eyes didn't waver. He just looked at him calmly. He told the old man in front of him, I can form an alliance with you, Your Excellency, just like the last time. But I don't need your empty promises, nor do I need you to answer any of my doubts and mysteries in alchemy. He said, I only have one question, and I need you to answer me directly. In the distance, amid the earth-shattering rumbles, Huaishir stared at the old man in front of him and asked word by word, Now, in front of me, the Grand Master who wants to form an alliance with me. Is it Publius or Garland? Behind him, Bichimos raised his scarlet eyes, no longer concealing his hunger and thirst for food. Behind him, the lightning radiance of water hate rose from his hand. Regardless of whether it was the origin substance incarnations behind them, the Paradise Guards, or even the Lizard Men army, all of them were coldly looking in his direction. They were waiting for his answer. The answer that would determine whether he was friend or foe. Behind the old man, Rachel was frozen in place, dazed. He stared blankly at the old man beside him and Huaishir across from him. He didn't understand at all. What were they talking about? Who exactly are you? Huaishir looked indifferently at the old man in front of him. Your Excellency, answer me. Who exactly are you? I am Garland Van Herman. The old man raised his hand and once again raised the contract in his hand. Do you have any questions about my identity? Huaishir, or do you think that Publius can impersonate me? Huaisher laughed softly. Ah, I don't have to worry about that. Publius might not be able to impersonate Garland, but Garland might be able to impersonate Publius, right? He paused for a moment, then asked curiously, however, is it convenient for you to show us the inheritance of the blessed Herman family? Legend has it that a single drop of your blood can expel all poisons and evil spirits. Ah, I forgot that you have a blood fever. What a coincidence, isn't it? Huaisher shrugged sympathetically. A legendary bloodline was actually destroyed by an illness in alchemy. What a pity. The heavens are truly unkind to you. What a pity. Garland remained silent. He didn't say anything, but at the same time, he didn't refute. I've always been curious about one thing. Huaisher held the water hatred in his hand, his smile growing more and more cheerful. It's about the rules and decrees of Helios. In order to protect the technology and power left behind by the gods, all alchemists born in Helios can't leave for the rest of their lives. Alchemists who come from outside can only stay for 70 years. They can either die after 70 years because they know too much, or they can leave Helios without knowing anything. At the same time, they have to accept the commandment to never tell anyone about anything above Helios. Old Mr. Garland, you are an outsider, so you are naturally free to come and go. But how did Publius leave Helios? Garland didn't say anything, but beside him, Rachel couldn't help but frown. It's just a decree. For a grandmaster, it's naturally easy to break it. There's always a way around it. Yes, that's what everyone thinks. Huaisher nodded. But there's another possibility, isn't there? He looked straight at the old man in front of him and asked again, what if, for Publius, there's no such thing as a rule that he can't leave? Why could Publius, the prisoner of Helios, come and go freely? Why would the skeleton of Publius think that he was a member of the Herman family? Why would Grandmaster Garland be so familiar with Helios? There were too many doubts and inconsistencies. All this time, Huaisher couldn't figure out what was going on. He once again recalled the principle of alchemy. If there was gain, there must be loss. Someone reminded me that the so-called price and result can be interchangeable. Sometimes, the important thing isn't what you gain, but what you lose. Huaisher stared at the old man in front of him. And what did you lose, Your Excellency? Garland didn't say anything, and Huaisher had already found the answer. After eliminating all the impossible answers, there's only one truth. Huaisher raised his finger and pointed at the old man in front of him, announcing in a booming voice, Publius is your biological son, isn't he? Dead silence. A deathly silence suddenly descended. Everyone fell into a state of shock, dumbstruck. Even the old man, who had always maintained a calm expression, was stunned. Garland, Ragnar, Bichimos, at the side, the incarnation of wrath spat on the ground in disdain. That inference was too stupid. The embodiment of compassion nodded in agreement. That's true. Even Bichimos couldn't help but show a look of disdain. Ahem, I'm sorry, that was a slip of the tongue. Let's try again. Huaisher coughed awkwardly, trying hard to put on a serious expression. He raised his finger again and said, after eliminating all the impossible answers, it's really no need to test me anymore, Huaisher. There's no need to be deliberately mystifying. Garland interrupted his indirect questioning and told him without hiding anything. Since you've seen Hecate's temple, you more or less have the answer in your heart, right? It's just like what you imagined. He answered frankly, that's right. Before I became Garland Van Herman, my name was Publius Augustus. Chapter 884. 210 years ago, Puberus, who was born in Helios, and Garland, who came from the present realm, met. Perhaps this was the intersection of their fates. Unfortunately, there was no turbulence, nor was there a moment when both sides knew at first glance that the other was their fated enemy. It was just a simple encounter. The alchemists from the present world came to Helios, and the alchemists of Helios entertained them with hospitality and bid farewell to the last group of guests who had arrived. From then on, they would spend a long 70 years together. For Puberus, Garland, an alchemist from the present realm, was too boring. He was unsmiling and uninteresting. For Garland, An existence like Pubris, who was too jumpy, was the real alien in the holy land of alchemists. He chattered incessantly and was extremely troublesome. It could be said that the two hated each other. But in order to cooperate on research topics and find out what each other was good at, the two sides had to maintain a peaceful and close relationship on the surface. They even had some secret cooperation that crossed the line. As the inheritor of the holy name of the blessed family, Garland violated the ban of the previous chief and secretly shared the books of the present realm with Pubris. In return, Pubris gave back the secrets of Helios. Both sides took what they needed. It was a good deal, but at the same time, it felt more and more like a taunt from fate. Pubris was clearly born in a holy land like Helios and inherited the bloodline of the Olympian gods. At the same time, he had a talent that was difficult for ordinary people to reach. But Pubris did not want to stay in a dry and monotonous place like Helios. He yearned for the prosperity of the present realm even in his dreams. And the alchemists from the present realm were limited by a short period of time. Due to their own identities and strict prohibitions, they were unable to pry into the true inheritance of Helios. It was like two frogs meeting in the dark. The frog at the bottom of the well wanted to go to the outside world, but the frog in the outside world wanted to stay in the well even in his dreams. They both lived in their own hell and another person's heaven at the same time. So, they made an agreement and reached the final deal. We performed the Eleusis secret ritual, Garland explained calmly. Although it was stolen from Hecate's authority, it pointed to the domain of Demeter, the mother of the four seasons. In other words, it was a reversal of gains and losses. Under the witness and presiding over by their mutual friend, Hades, they exchanged the price of their fates. But unlike the others, they exchanged twice. The first exchange was for the loss, and the second exchange was gain. Garland told Huaishur, it wasn't just a simple exchange of our identities, but also a complete exchange of our destinies, talents, and even souls. Garland of the Eleusis secret was a complete exchange, the Eleusis secret ritual of the Eleusis secret too. From then on, Pubris became Garland, and Garland became Pubris. Wait, but if Garland was a Elus Eleusis future, Elus Eleusis was Elus Helios. Was Garen Ellis, was Elus Helion? How do you know who you are? Was it just a memory? If an apple had the shape of an orange, the structure of an orange, the taste of an orange, and even the shelf life and taste of an orange, then it should be an orange. It was just like the ship of Theseus. After the two ships exchanged their decks, rails, sails, equipment, and even crew members, other than changing records and a vague memory, it was no different from not changing at all. If that's the case, how can you say that you were once Pubris? Maybe you're just Garland with Pubris's memory. This is alchemy, isn't it, Huaishur? For the first time, a smile appeared on Garland's cold face. It was so calm, but it sent chills down one's spine. Sometimes, what's important is not what you gain, but what you lose. Would ordinary iron that had turned into gold still be ordinary iron? Ordinary iron did not care. As long as it could become gold, that was enough. Philosophical speculations were never important in alchemy. The so-called replacement was just a process, and the most important thing was the result. As far as Pubris was concerned, this was the greatest creation and escape of his life. Long before he escaped from the lunar prison, he had already escaped from the cage of Helios' fate. From then on, their fates had been misaligned, like two intersecting straight lines entangling with each other before continuing in their original direction. What kind of entanglement had happened at that tiny intersection point? That was not important. What was important was that they had gotten the result they wanted. The funny thing was that the Eleusis secret instrument, which was originally a secret instrument used by devils and swindlers to steal the wealth and lives of others, had led to the birth of two great grandmasters by accident. Garland, who thirsted for alchemy, did not have an inheritance, while Pubris, who had an inheritance, did not have freedom. If they had not exchanged fates, they might not have been able to achieve anything. It was as absurd as winning the jackpot twice in a row. exchanging the future of a great grandmaster for the future of another great grandmaster. This time, it was a TP on the spot. But then, Huaisher could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. He finally realized the truly serious part of this problem. Using alchemy to interfere with fate was bound to abide by the rules of alchemy. There were gains and losses. Disasters and miracles were two sides of the same coin. Since the exchange of fates had led to the birth of two great grandmasters, it must have been accompanied by a price. But what is the price? Fate itself is the price. Why sure isn't it? Garland seemed to be smiling, so mocking. I'm Garland. What I got was everything that Garland originally enjoyed. Reputation, ability, specialty, experience, bloodline. As for Publilius, what he had obtained was a future that belonged to him. From hundreds of years ago, it was destined to be the future, which is what you see now, the present. Following his words, a blood-red flame soared into the sky in the distance. Finally, it clung to the edge of the sun. It touched the boundary of the gods. Clench. A hurricane swept over Helios. Amidst the roaring sound of the wind, ecstatic laughter could be heard. He had finally touched the edge of his dream. He had grasped his own fate. Even if this fate, this dream, this self was nothing more than a fake that he had obtained from someone else. From the very beginning, the existence named Pubris was the crystallization of the meticulous planning of the alchemists of Helios. It was a miracle created through genetics, source substance, Hell's bloodline, and the secret instrument of fate. It could be said that he was an existence that was specially born for alchemy. The final result that was completed in order to satisfy the taboo wishes and goals in the hearts of the alchemists of Helios for generations. This was originally a secret that should have been hidden before the exchange. It was just like the signs of Garland's own blood fever and the many dark inheritances of the Blessed Family. But after both sides learned about it, they did not hesitate at all. It was as if Pubris did not care. Regarding this, the former Garland would gladly endure it. The so-called life, no matter how rich and colorful it is only a short 100 years. It will pass in the blink of an eye. When you come, you have nothing. When you leave quietly. In the end, you can't even keep a handful of ashes. It's too embarrassing. Compared to their own creations, the alchemists are too pitiful and lowly. The former Garland asked, "Don't you feel indignant?" He said, "I want to become an eternal object, but nothing in this world can last forever. This is the so-called life. As long as it's exciting enough, I don't think there's anything wrong with having an end point." Pubris shook his head. "You should know that even the gods can't be eternal. Then I'll become a god first," Garland said resolutely. "One day, I'll be able to become immortal. So, let's make an exchange, Pubris." The alchemist held his hand, his eyes shining with a fanatical light. "This way, I can become immortal, and you can be free." At that moment, Pubris realized that perhaps the alchemist was more worthy of everything that the name Pubris represented than he was. No, perhaps he had come for this. This was his destiny. At the same time, this was the price he had to pay. Thus, Pubris became Garland, and Garland became Pubris. Since then, it had been a long time. They walked on the path that once belonged to others, chasing after the results that they had dreamed of. No matter the hardship, torture, or anxiety, even if they were trapped in a cage or in a quagmire, unable to extricate themselves, they wearily paid the price for their choices. But they had never regretted the deal that day. Until now. "But what about you?" Huaisher asked in return. "What's your price?" "I've already paid my share, Huaisher. My debt was paid earlier than his, although it may not have been much lighter." Garland looked at him meaningfully. "Now, it's your turn." Huaisher shook his head coldly. "I never owed you anything, and I've never asked for anything from fate that I didn't deserve." "Perhaps, but is that really the case?" Garland said nonchalantly. "In Helios, the connection between cause and effect is far greater than in other places. Here, fate is a vector in a sealed flask. When a vector appears, a vector in the opposite direction will inevitably appear in order to return to balance. This is the essence of alchemy. There must be a trade-off when you gain something. You came to Helios for your own desires, and in the end, you stood on the opposite side of hubris. Isn't this the price that both of you have to pay? You will gain a lot, but you will also lose a lot. Garland meaningfully repeated the prophecy from the old shaman, Yima. But if you want to gain more, or lose less, the solution is right in front of you. Along with his words, the hurricane whistled, and there was a constant roar. Rachel's face suddenly turned pale. This was because the terrifying shadows had emerged from the bone tower. Under Hades' command, in the darkness that light could not illuminate, countless aberration spirits and a large group of hell that was born from the precipitate of the abyss had spread out in all directions. The first to bear the brunt of the attack was Huaishur, who had long been on the kill list. In front of the surging army of hell, Gallus sat on the golden and bone chariot and stared at the surging core in the distance. When he raised the scythe in his hand, countless ferocious shadows behind him roared and turned into a torrent, rushing toward this place. As for Huaishur, who was sitting on the Sunmaker's throne, she looked up. Chapter 885. The ink-like darkness seemed to be endless. After regaining control of the situation, the countless hells that were cultivated on Helios naturally returned to his hands, turning into a frenzy that was enough to completely destroy all opponents. They're coming this way. Rachel screamed and subconsciously took a few steps back. He returned to Garland's side, hoping that the existence of the Grand Master could give him a little sense of security. But Garland still did not move. He just looked at Huaishur quietly, waiting for him to do something. Huaishur did not do anything. He just stood there. He allowed Hades' army to quickly approach, as if he did not care about those things at all. He just nodded. "Oh," he said, "I understand." Huaishur said that he understood. "Was there anything else?" "Nothing else." "Then can you be quiet for a while? Don't scream anymore." But Rachel was still screaming. Huaishur sighed, raised his hand, and covered his ears. Even when Rachel stopped screaming, he did not put his hand down, because behind him, in the projection core of the Twilight Village, at the top of the furnace of eternal frost, in the alchemy fire that burned forever, a cold eye slowly opened. Looking down, he looked at the earth below. Then a ray of blazing light gushed out from the eye, accompanied by the sound of countless steel tremors bursting out, turning into a blazing light that penetrated the sky and earth. In the blink of an eye, it swept across the endless black tide. The light dissipated. Then terrifying flames rose from the earth. The horrifying heat spread and turned into a twisted wall of fire. In the blink of an eye, a tragic gap was plowed in the tens of thousands of soldiers. The stench and darkness rose into the dark sky, shrouded by stars, and quickly disappeared without a trace. Soon after, more stars rose from the earth, more steel, and more blazing light. As countless steel buildings flipped over, the war module was activated. The giant anti-aircraft cannons stood tall like a forest, slanted and aimed at the sky, spewing flames. When those giant ballista-like cannonballs fell to the earth and turned into a storm of steel, the curse from the distant hell spread in all directions. Blood rain, febrile wind, precipitate tide, origin substance withering, toxic air, life decay. True hell and true despair would reappear here. The crystal of calamity created by the 13 kingmakers, the land of eternal dusk, had arrived. Hades wasn't the only one who had the geographical advantage. Even though they had lost the Sunmaker, the Twilight Village still showed its ferocious appearance under the maintenance of the Grand Master Mikhail and the control of the Sunmaker's successor, Huaishur. Even though it was only a scale that had arrived here, as long as it had enough energy, it would still be an out-and-out war machine. Now, death and destruction were falling from the sky. Even after losing its eternal power, it still retained the terrifying power it had once stirred up in the War of the Worlds. Not to mention the remodeling of the Sky Prison Fortress and the maintenance from the Grandmaster. Is this the Creator's Dusk Village? The eternal frost furnace truly lives up to its name. Even after being damaged, it still has such astonishing defensive power. Garland raised his head and admired the black smoke rising from the countless chimneys in front of him. The steel roared as it operated, and the mechanical operation that seemed to be able to transform the entire world. It actually turned the entire world into its own array and secret apparatus. Although it's a hellish technology, it still has considerable merits. It's really desirable. If you want to discuss the technology, we can talk about it later. Huaisher looked over coldly. I've already shown my sincerity, Mr. Garland. Now it's your turn. Garland shook his head. I don't have something as convenient as the Land of Dusk, nor do I have martial arts achievements that can be compared to the King of Doomsday. All I can give is a little help. As he spoke, he looked at Rachel beside him. Rachel's expression was conflicted for a moment, but he still held the box in his hand and stepped forward to present it to Huaisher. What's this? The trick of hiding a sword in a fish intestine? How about changing it to a map? There was no need to open it at all. Huaisher could feel what was in the box with just a glance. The aura and outline of metal, the shape of a sword. When the box was opened, the iron light that had been through the vicissitudes of life was revealed. But when Huaisher reached out to pick it up, he could not feel the weight in it at all. It was like an illusion, but the miracle contained in it was genuine. The color of the blade was constantly changing, like a rainbow, and the tip of the sword had obvious traces of recasting, exuding a majestic and cold aura. What's this? Huaisher asked. The sword of the present, the sword of gold, and the sword of joy. Garland said, This is an imitation I made based on the sword of Charlemagne of the Roman Empire, Joveus, but also has the same effect and majesty as Charlemagne himself. The legendary holy sword that can command the sun, moon, and stars to revolve and move mountains and rivers. Huaisher frowned. But it's not in the present. What's the use of making it? Give me a remote control of the present in the vast space, and it's the previous version of the remote control. How can you think of this? It's precisely because it's not in the present that it can be recreated so easily, isn't it? Garland said. Besides, its real effect is not to control the present, but to make the knights of Charlemagne obey your orders. Ha ha! Huaisher laughed. Where am I going to find the knights of Charlemagne? In the tomb. Before he finished speaking, a brilliant flame appeared behind Garland, and an array of tens of thousands of people walked out of the void. Banners fluttered, and iron light swirled. Countless handsome war horses raised their eyes, and together with the paladins who descended from the void, they bowed their heads to the swordsmen in front of them. They offered their loyalty. Right at the front, in the middle of the 12 solemn and mighty knights, a middle-aged knight with a cold face put his hand on his chest and saluted. At your service, your majesty. The 12 paladins of Charlemagne, the legendary paladins, and the 3,100 members of the Knights of Charlemagne. These are all the legions that I have created. Now, I'm handing them over to you, Huaisher. Garland knocked on his cane, and the tower that belonged to him in the distance glowed and roared. Suddenly, countless pieces of land were merged under the eternal frost furnace. Then, countless cables that danced like snakes extended from Garland's tower and connected to every port of the Twilight Village. A terrifying amount of heat was poured into the eternal frost furnace, as if an endless amount of energy was squandered, causing the flames of the eternal frost furnace to become more and more violent. With Mikhail in between, Garland began to operate and modify the secret ritual of the Twilight Village on his own. Under Garland's control, the land of the Twilight Village continued to bulge, sink, shrink, and expand. Like a constantly changing machine that was constantly evolving, it changed its appearance in just a few minutes. There were even many patented secret apparatuses that were unique to the Stone Cauldron Society, which made the burning and forging of the eternal frost furnace faster and faster. If it was an ancient fortress that stood high above the mountains and was difficult to conquer before, then now, it had become a behemoth shrouded in clouds and fog, making it difficult to see its true outline. It was becoming more and more unpredictable. After the efficiency increased by 12%, The energy consumption was reduced by 20%. Mikhail is used to the large-scale structure, but he still neglected the details of the operation. With such a long distance, the changes are naturally delayed, Garland commented faintly. He's still too young. TSK. Someone's sneer seemed to be heard in the wind, but no one refuted it. In front of the few oldest grandmasters in the whole realm, who was not a young man. Besides, both sides had different specialties, so there was nothing to say. Garland had focused on the forging of the stigmata for so many years, so he was naturally good at doing delicate work. But asking his old arms and legs to preside over large-scale alchemy and group alchemy? Then, Garland's fingers tapped repeatedly. As countless plots connected, the tower that belonged to him appeared out of thin air in the territory of the Twilight Village. The projection of the Twilight Village suddenly shook, and countless rays of iron light burst forth. The originally faintly illusory silhouette suddenly became completely solid. With a Grandmaster who knew Helios like the back of his hand as an important fulcrum, the Twilight Village at this moment was equivalent to having two Grandmasters maintaining it together. In an instant, it took root in Helios and was indestructible. Then, one tower after another rose from the ground. Obviously, with Mikhail's permission, all the alchemists who had signed a contract with Garland had their towers moved over from the large group of attacks in Hell. Then, they were instantly unified into the Twilight Village, with layers of restrictions and restrictions, becoming the important fulcrum of Mikhail's group alchemy. And all of a sudden, the alchemists had mixed feelings about being under someone else's roof. If they relied on Garland, they could still comfort themselves. After all, he was a Grandmaster, and it was not shameful to rely on him. But now it was Huaishur and the others. They had no choice. What else could they do when they were under someone else's roof? If they couldn't, they would have to take on Hades' counterattack by themselves. There were so many hordes of hell and the army of aberrations, and their ashes would be scattered by them. Obviously, they had received Garland's instructions in advance, and there was also the contract. A wise man submits to circumstances. It was good enough that they could stay alive, so why would they still want to rely on others? There was no need for Huaishur to instruct them, and they accepted Mikhail's deployment without any resistance, throwing themselves into the operation of the Twilight Village. In the crowd, old Lady Yima held her bronze staff and nodded slightly to Huaishur, then quickly disappeared under her own obelisk. She looked a little better, although there were more than a dozen long nails and secret instruments on her body. The symptoms of the aberration of divinity had dissipated a lot. She had achieved her purpose of coming to Helios, but she did not know what price she had paid. In this way, under Huaishur's perplexed gaze, Garland threw almost all his gains in Helios in one breath, including all his subordinates and plots of land, including a large amount of divinity. He was not worried at all that Huaishur would betray him. Next, I will do my best to interfere with Puberus's secret instrument, and the rest will be up to you. Garland finally said, "You decide what to do, and the others will cooperate with you. Don't disturb me." Chapter 886. Huaishur did not expect that Garland would not give him a blank check this time. Instead, he gave him a huge discount for free. Even Huaishur found it hard to believe. "You're leaving it to me? What else?" Garland asked. "I can't let you do alchemy and let an old thing like me, who doesn't even know what a battlefield looks like, command, right? That's not impossible." Anyway, it was not the first time that the great master did not speak human language. Huaishur was already very experienced. He did not give Garland a chance to refute and asked again, "What if I want to contact you?" "Just look for Rachel." After a moment of silence, Garland glanced at the cowering alchemist behind him. "He will contact me. Do you have any other questions?" Huaishur shook his head and turned to leave. However, Rachel, who was left behind, subconsciously chased after him and called out, "Great! Great master!" Garland turned back and looked at him, but Rachel was stunned in place. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Finally, he lowered his head and asked, "Is there anything else you want me to do?" "No, you're on your own." Garland retracted his gaze indifferently and disappeared. Only Rachel was still stunned on the spot and became dispirited. Soon, he noticed Huaishi's interested gaze. "I feel like there's some kind of deal between you two that I don't know about." Huaishi stroked his chin and asked curiously, "Is it convenient to tell me?" "It's none of your business." Rachel glared at him and wanted to say something, but after seeing the pile of strange things behind Huaishi, he suddenly lost his courage and found a corner to squat down. Huaishi and the friendly giant dog beside him looked at each other and heard a loud roar in the distance. The earth was shaking slightly. Huaishi thought for a moment and returned to the throne of the Sunmaker. He looked up and saw a huge figure walking out of the thick smoke and fire. Giants? The hunched and emaciated figures were so large that when they staggered forward, the entire land of Helios trembled. "No, that's not right. I feel like I've seen him somewhere in the underworld." When the flames dissipated, the incomplete halos hovering above their heads slowly appeared. The naked and skinny giants were wearing collars that pierced their necks. As if they had been tortured, they staggered forward under the pull of countless chains. Blood dripped down. Traces of broken wings could still be seen on their backs. It was as if an angel in the legends had fallen into the hands of a demon. After being tortured, it had fallen into madness. He unconsciously swung his arms, and in the endless nightmare, he opened his mouth and roared, but there was no sound. Only the sound of a true tidal wave spread out. Even from a distance of 1,000 meters, the outer walls of the Twilight Village were faintly shaken. As a follower of the Kings of Hell, Gala was already used to war. He had personally participated in and commanded countless fierce battles. At this moment, after seeing the bombardment of the Twilight Village, he made a countermeasure without hesitation. On one hand, he dispersed the density of the large group of Hell and used the tactic of dispersing the troops to reduce the damage of the artillery. Then he stirred up the fog to cover the battlefield and conceal his own existence. Soon, in the thick fog, siege weapons appeared. Those gigantic creatures that looked like deformed angels whose wings had been torn apart were still silently singing and praising God with their halos above their heads. Even if their gods had already fallen into hell, even if they themselves had been distorted into crazy monsters. The artillery that fell from the sky fell into the range of the Ode of the Abyss. It quietly turned into iron powder and fell from the sky. Before it fell to the ground, it rotted into poisonous dust. It was like a copper-green rain. Under the protection of the distorted angels, the large group of Hell slowly moved forward, like pieces of wriggling black spots, squeezing closer to the edge of the Twilight Village. Above the eternal frost furnace, the giant eye in the alchemy fire opened again, and the red light spewed out. It swept across in an instant. The long distance was crossed in an instant. The invisible sound was cut, and there was a strange sound like a bubble bursting. The blazing light beam left deep burn marks on the bodies of 3 or 4 distorted angels and cut off the head of an angel. The head that was like a boulder fell to the ground, but the lips were still opening and closing, singing silently. The body that lost its head was still moving forward. Even after burning the chains, its speed was unbelievably fast. The angel, who had lost control, trampled over its allies and danced wildly. It was now heading straight for the Twilight Village. Countless artillery fire shrouded its body, smashing its huge body into pieces. But its limbs that were riddled with holes still swayed forward. It crashed straight into the high metal wall, shaking the cracks on it one after another. It actually resisted the self-repair of the high wall and forcibly tore open a crack. The stinky blood flowed and fertilized the large group of Hell below, giving birth to another round of distortion. A gap was torn open in the defense of the Twilight Village. It was wide open. Huaisha frowned. The giant eye of the eternal frost furnace burned divinity to attack, and the consumption was too large. One shot cost 4 or 5 points, which was enough to buy a limited edition Huaisha. It was not cost-effective to use it to deal with this kind of thing. But now, with Garland's gift pack, it was not like there was no way to restrain it. He raised his head and looked to the side. He pointed to the distorted angel that was rapidly approaching in the distance. That thing, can you catch it alive? The paladin covered in steel knelt on one knee and reported, "It's easy to kill it, but it's difficult to catch it alive. We don't have the tools to deal with that kind of opponent. What if we add this?" Huaishir took out the rope of sorrow and handed it over. The paladin raised both hands and took it, saying firmly, "It will not disappoint you." "Very good." Huaishir nodded. "Then let me see the bravery of Charlemagne's knights." The paladin got up, left a messenger behind, and turned to leave. Soon, a high-pitched horn sound burst out from the tight formation under the eternal frost furnace. Iron light flashed, and countless high-pitched sounds of steel rubbing against each other were heard. Flags were raised high again. But this time, it was not the flag of Charlemagne, but the flag of decaying dream that represented the authority of the great master of fate. Without needing Huaishir's instructions, most of the knights had already gone to the high wall to help defend the city. And in front of the huge crack, a line of cavalry covered in heavy armor was ready to go. Their iron hooves stomped on the ground, and sparks burst out. They stared indifferently at the surging black tide in the distance. Hurricanes with ashes flew in from outside the crack, bringing with them ear-piercing screams and cries. He was solemn and silent, as if he was frozen ice. When a paladin named Roland got on his warhorse and pointed to the front, the frozen ice instantly cracked, and a mighty stream of iron rushed out from the crack to the battlefield outside with a roar. Those cold armors reflected the sun in the darkness of the universe, and glowed with a bright and solemn brilliance. There was no bellow, not even a single breath spilling out from beneath their armor. In the instant that the banners were raised, the legendary paladins rode their war horses and charged into the battlefield that was shrouded in mist and flames. On the golden and white bone chariot, Gala looked up slightly and waved his right hand down. Then dozens of chanters behind him picked up the bone flutes and began to play sharp and ear-piercing noises. In the middle of the army, dozens of huge iron cages trembled violently, as if there were some behemoths struggling violently inside. Soon, when the gates were opened, wriggling aberrations crawled out from the cages. Those aberrations with twisted limbs chewed on their watchers, and their sharp bone spurs were soon covered with sweet and fragrant food. Under the urging and edict of the flutes, they quickly raised their heads again from the blood and looked at the knights who were galloping out of the crack. Hissing sounds burst out. The huge aberrations' bodies swelled again and pounced in the direction of the knights. The billowing stench of blood rushed to their faces. In front of Charlemagne's knights, the leading paladin, Roland, lifted the heavy lance beside the saddle indifferently and gripped it tightly. The sound of steel rubbing against each other constantly burst out behind him. The silent knights had already pulled out their weapons, gripped the reins tightly, and sped up. Sparks hung from the iron hooves on the ground, and the roar of galloping became louder and louder. Without any hesitation, they aimed at the aberrations in front of them. The eyes behind the armor did not waver at all. Only the iron light and the black tide were rapidly approaching each other, and the moment they were about to touch, Roland suddenly burst out with a high-pitched roar. It was like thunder. Brilliant golden light circulated around the knights, and in an instant, the speed of the entire iron stream accelerated again. Accompanied by the violent tremors of the earth, there were flames rising from their bodies. The scorching red steel was burning, plowing a dark scorch mark on the earth. The flames burned fiercely and turned into a torrent, spreading to both sides. Only pitch-black body fluids could be seen splashing out like rainwater. The cone-shaped formation brazenly rushed forward, tearing apart the aberrations in front of them with irresistible force, and went against the flow again. The most primitive and violent impact of potential energy brought about the most tragic and direct effect. Wherever it passed, all flesh and blood were smashed into a pulp, as if countless iron hammers had smashed through and torn apart. Under the protection of the brilliant golden light, not a single person was hurt. The artillery fire of the Twilight Village caught up with them at just the right time, covering the front line torn apart by the knights, burying everything in fire and decay. At the forefront, Roland had already rushed into the chanting of the aberrated angels. The inaudible chanting reverberated in the air like a tsunami, but the invisible tsunami was immediately torn apart by the cavalry that broke in. The paladins of Charlemagne, who suddenly spread out to both sides, plowed through the large group of hell like the edge of a blade, destroying all opponents as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The rope of sorrow extended endlessly from between their iron horses, quickly wrapping around the limbs of the aberrated angels, entangling them. The huge monster that staggered forward lowered its head, raised its palm, and slapped the ground. Roland had already drawn his sword and slashed at the monster. In an instant, a dazzling iron light flashed, and then a huge arm fell to the ground in a spurt of blood. After sweeping past the two sides like a tide, the chain instantly contracted, and under the efforts of the knights, it tightened again on the aberrated angel's body. In the roar, the aberrated angel knelt on the ground, trying to prop up its body, but it could not break free from the shackles. Roland opened his mouth and shouted loudly. The two separated cavalry once again converged. After a large circle, they dragged the heavy prey with the chains and returned to the crack in the village of Dusk. The crack that was slowly closing stopped repairing and then quickly opened like a door. Under the control of Huaishur, countless heavy steel buildings reversed, and huge grinding wheels rose from them one after another. When Roland hung the chain on it, it spun rapidly, bursting out countless sparks. Under the huge power provided by the eternal frost furnace, the grinding wheels began to shrink rapidly, pulling the struggling, aberrated angel into the interior of the Twilight Village. On that straight path, countless steel reversed, revealing the huge structure under the eternal frost furnace. With the opening of layers of gates, dazzling flames were revealed from the deepest part of the darkness. The molten steel gathered into an ocean, stirring up layers of waves, stinging everyone's eyes. More and more restraints wrapped around the limbs of the aberrated angel, pulling it inch by inch into the boiling molten iron. Only the tragic screams echoed in the ears of the large group of hell, bringing a bone-piercing chill. Such a cruel way of execution. What was the point? On the chariot, Gala was stunned for a moment, looking up at the top of the eternal frost furnace. On the throne of the Sunmaker, Huaishur was also looking at him, smiling. Lips opened and closed silently. Across a long distance, he conveyed his praise word by word. "Your monster is very good." At that moment, an even more ear-piercing scream came from the molten iron and spread. It was as if it had been engulfed by endless despair. It was hard to imagine what kind of encounter would make it cry out like that. In the furnace, the angel's halo cracked inch by inch, and its scarred face twitched violently, but it was completely covered by the molten iron that had come to life. The casting began. It was only now that Gala saw the second half of Huaishur's sentence clearly from his mouth. "Unfortunately, it's mine now." Waves suddenly rose in the sea of molten iron, and then the outline of a huge monster climbed out of it. Countless boiling molten iron sprinkled down like a rainstorm. And the monster, cast with the enemy's divinity, spread out its wings that could cover the entire sea of molten iron. It was still the combination of nirvana transformation and biological reconstruction. But this time, it was not using its own origin equipment, but the siege weapons from the enemy. In the blink of an eye, the target was completely disintegrated through the boiling molten iron, and then it was recast with a different posture. The huge mechanical insect that used to occupy the underground domain of the Twilight Village, the mechanical monster cast by the shapeshifter, once again reappeared above Helios. In the hurricane, a steel moth the size of a building flapped its wings and rose into the sky, hovering in the eternal dim light of the Twilight Village. Wherever it passed, dark clouds spread and lightning brewed. So cool. Then let's have another one. Huaishur pointed into the distance and turned back to the paladin. "I want the biggest one." "As you wish." Roland nodded. Chapter 887. At this moment, outside the high walls of the village of Dusk, a fierce battle had begun. The guards on the city wall skillfully operated all kinds of machine guns, squandering the bullets that had just been made from the production line, forming a firing point, and began to shoot freely. With the help of the Master of Metal from the Russian Federation, the equipment of the park guards had once again ushered in a new generation in less than half a day. With the terrifying productivity of the Village of Dusk, as long as there was technology, there would be endless output. The Titan III exoskeleton power armor, the representative weapon of the Russian Federation suppression force. The Vulture anti-armor shotgun that could break through the defense of high-grade ascendants. The Bellowbird GACB 473 city defense machine gun. Even the Swallow 2 ground-to-ground missiles were continuously produced from the production line, like a hen laying eggs. When a huge steel moths rose into the sky, dark clouds quickly shrouded the sky of the Village of Dusk. Under the dim light, countless lightning bolts emerged from it, and large groups of creatures with wings on their backs were constantly turned into charcoal and fell from it like a rainstorm. That was the hope of the new era, the weather tool that the Changers were proud of. After ushering in the complete hell, it had become an out-and-out weapon of war. During the War of the Worlds, under the investment of the workshop owner, tens of thousands of iron moths once soared above the sea of titans, locking the sky. Soon, as Paladin Charlemagne returned, bathed in blood, another deformed angel was dragged into the molten steel. It screamed and burned, and after being brutally broken down into the tiniest parts by the steel, it flowed on the assembly line, where countless delicate arms began to reprocess it. Finally, on the slowly rising platform, the reborn steel spider raised its slender legs and joined the hunt. The clumsy and huge steel spiders climbed over the city wall. Soon, they fell into the endless black tide outside the city wall. They fought with all their might and brought about terrible casualties. After that, they were heavily injured by the hordes of hell. They disintegrated and were scrapped amidst the sparks and thick smoke. They were dismembered into pieces. However, as the abdominal sac ruptured, countless steel balls the size of a normal person rolled out from within. The round steel balls reflected many confused and deformed faces. Those smooth shells quickly fell apart, and the small spiders that were produced from them began to jump out nimbly. They waved their sharp blade-like legs and began to spread wildly. Hundreds of spiders scattered across the vast battlefield, like a drop of water merging into the ocean, quickly disappearing. However, it didn't take long for one drop of water to turn into 2, 4, 8. The engineering equipment that was used to deal with the wreckage and debris had been rewritten many times and turned into ruthless replicating machines. The nightmarish von Neumann machines hunted, ate, and rapidly extracted all the steel alloys in the smelting furnace, grew, and then began a new cycle of reproduction. It was as if there was no end on the golden and white bone chariot. Gala held the sickle blade and quietly looked at the scene in the distance. She was no longer anxious and impatient. Instead, she was full of patience. Her eyes did not fall on the spiders and moths. Instead, she focused on the city wall. In the present realm, this kind of weapon is really convenient. A mortal can kill a demigod by pulling the trigger. There is no difference between a noble who has inherited the sacred blood and a poor beggar in front of this weapon. He stroked his chin and praised. Although it is a little hypocritical, the era of the astronomical society is really amazing. An era without gods? On the chariot, another passenger sighed. It sounds really good. It must be very peaceful, right? Oh, maybe. Gala looked back and glanced at the great Greek hero, Hercules, and said indifferently, they don't worship gods, not because they are more civilized than civilized, but because in their era, gods have no power. They worship other things, more powerful things. Hercules looked at her, puzzled. Most people worship money, but more people worship power. Businessmen and ambitious people have been around since ancient times. It is not rare. I haven't finished yet. Some of them also worship numbers. They like to write down every number of people's daily food, clothing, housing, and transportation, and then summarize them together. It is called big numbers. It's like a bank account. Even if they want to buy something, they have to look at the big numbers. Without the big numbers, there is no way to live. It's so strange. Are they all mathematicians? Most likely not. And there are even stranger things. Some people worship free of charge. Will it really be free? Those who will charge are more expensive, but they like it. They are immersed in the sense of accomplishment of reaping without sowing, and they are never tired of it. They have no idea that they have been turned into commodities by those who worship numbers. They even know it, but they don't care. Gala laughed mockingly. There are also many people who worship invisible bills. Every day, they stay in front of an altar called the computer. They always feel that they can buy at a low price and sell at a high price. They feel sad and happy for the invisible currency that can't be matched at all. Can they make money from this? Maybe. There is always a glimmer of joy in extreme despair, right? How can there be such a bizarre world? Hercules frowned and shook his head. It's simply a fantasy story. If you want to deceive people, you have to make it sound more believable. Ha ha, I haven't said that people worship loans, paper, and leather cases. Gala laughed, full of joy. That's why I like this world so much. It's always bizarre, crueler than hell, and more novel than hell. Every day, there are countless scams that lead people to fall, and they always bring me endless surprises. Once again, he pulled out the sickle and raised it to the front. It's almost time. Let the big guys go up and bring our friends a little surprise. Under the chariot, the herald blew the horn again. In the loud and long sound, in the fog, suddenly, a behemoth flapped its wings and rose into the air. Where the huge bat wings passed, the dark clouds dissipated. A strange light bloomed. In the light, the killing intent of the entire battlefield seemed to be diluted. In reverse, anger, pain, and despair were all transformed into an indescribable sweetness and excitement. All the hordes of hell were instantly fanatical. In contrast, all the garrisons on the defense line of the Twilight Village felt a sense of emptiness. It was meaningless. War could only create new wars. Anger would only lead to more evil consequences. Killing was meaningless. Only by stopping the war and embracing each other could they warm the world with love and kindness. Such an unreasonable thought instantly appeared in the area covered by the light, and then rapidly expanded in the soul. It actually made people unable to raise their hostility. Instead, they rushed towards the opponent's sword and opened their arms. Stop the war and embrace peace. Even if it was a one-sided peace, even if they were beaten on the left side of their face, they still had the right side of their face. Let them fight and calm down. As long as the other side felt their sincerity and restraint, they would definitely be able to fill the world with love. The chaos spread rapidly, and the behemoth had already pounced on the iron moth and began a fierce battle with the ruthless steel. In the battle, the ruthless casting behemoth was infected by love and gradually stopped resisting. Hell Sequence 11th. It was the one who wore the crown, second only to the ruler. With the ranking of the Solomon sequence, it was enough to be crowned with the title of Duke. Gussion, just by existing here, this terrifying spiritual infection brought about an irresistible plague. It was a poison of the soul named peace, love, and understanding. On the throne of the Sunmaker, Huaishir looked up and gradually frowned. Naturally, there were holy knights who pulled out the longbows on their backs and aimed at the shadow in the sky. However, when the bowstrings were pulled, the hostility rose to the maximum, and it seemed to have attracted Gyujin's attention. Under the bat wings, the green eyes casually looked over, and in an instant, this overinflated killing intent reversed, making it difficult for them to release the bowstrings. Even if they gritted their teeth and shot with all their might, after the arrow flew into the sky, it soon fell crookedly to the ground. At this moment, Gyujin's will seem to have actual power. If the hostility was too pure, it would cause Gussion to interfere. However, if the arrow was not filled with pure killing intent, it would be impossible to break through the halo of kindness that surrounded Gussion. One of the 12 holy knights frowned and grabbed the longbow. Just as he was about to shoot, he saw Huaishur raise his hand. No need. Huaishur rested her chin on her hand and said calmly, "If it likes to spread peace, then let it spread it. Let's see if its kindness and peace can change everything." Just as well, with a sum of divinity in his account, he could finally free himself. At that moment, the dark crack of the ultimate slowly appeared behind Huaishur. Great Ming's silhouette was outlined, and he looked at the sky indifferently. He looked at it coldly. Then, hatred sprouted. Immeasurable hatred and hatred emerged from the body of the iron moth, as if the door to hell had suddenly opened. Thousands of years of despair and anger flowed out from it, turning into a sticky and dark torrent that covered the wings of the iron moth. Anger, sadness, pain, hatred. As Huaishur looked up, the darkness that had sprouted from the depths of the soul gushed out, and in an instant, it turned into a torrent that rushed into the sky and covered everything. The intense hatred and pain had turned into an ocean, causing Gyujin's huge body to stop for a moment and twitch violently. It was as if it was drowned by the tide. The halo was rapidly shrinking and trembling, and the sound of glass cracking could be heard. It was like a fortress made of sand in front of the tide, collapsing at the first touch. Hypocritical kindness and lie-like love were not worth mentioning in front of this hatred that could turn into matter and exist in the world forever. The dark clouds surged like waves. In the ocean of hatred, the iron moth and Gusion fought fiercely. Blood rain poured down, and with anger and killing intent, it filled the entire battlefield again. When Huaishur raised his finger, the fire of the eternal frost furnace was dyed black by the darkness that flowed out from the ultimate. The light shone, and the kingdom of heaven returned to hell. The war had begun again. Along with anger, pain, and hatred, Great Ming's miracle was operating on this battlefield. Chapter 888. Looks like their peace isn't going well. Huaishur looked away in disappointment. When Gyujin's body fell from the sky in pieces, a loud bang was heard. Countless gorgeous flowers grew out of the rapidly rotting corpses before they fell to the ground. Countless pure, white iris flower petals scattered in the air. The dense sweet fragrance set off the blood and wore as if they were in a dream. "It's beautiful." Hercules, who was sharpening his sword, looked up and praised, "It's not bad to have such a beautiful place as a showcase." "Great arbiter of fate?" Galen nodded in understanding. He was not frustrated or angry because of a momentary setback. To him, such a level of struggle was not even an appetizer. It was just a warm-up. He was like a banquet organizer who was passionate about hosting. As the eternal follower of the withered king, before the banquet started, Gala would meticulously inquire about the preferences and taboos of every participant. He would tirelessly prepare everything from chairs, tapestries, lights, music, and utensils. Finally, he would serve the most important dishes. Finally, he tasted death in a carefree manner. After hosting a banquet, he would immediately prepare for the next one. In a place like hell, there was no lack of death. Naturally, there was no lack of success and failure. What was lacking was interesting guests. For example, the existence in front of him, the enemy he had to face. It had been a long time since he had such a pleasant feeling. He was like a child who had opened a treasure box, and he could continuously dig out new toys. "This is really interesting." Gala grinned, and his smile was ferocious. He raised his scythe again and ordered, "Since the appetizing soup is not enough to satisfy my appetite, why don't you add a few more dishes?" As he spoke, the earth rumbled. An endless stream of darkness gushed out from the cracks, and the alchemy creatures from Solomon's hell sequence emerged from it. There was a strange old man riding on a huge, mutated crocodile with a ferocious falcon on his shoulder. There was a strange dwarf with a lion head and a human face controlling illusions. There was a headless archer with a green cloak flashing in the shadows. There was a vague silhouette with a toad, a human face, and a cat's head. Her limbs were connected like rings, but she was constantly emitting strange radiation and poisonous fog. There was a beautiful woman who made countless hells excited, and even holy knights could not resist her charm. There was a solidifier with a venomous snake coiled around her, holding a horn and a sword. There was a fleeting phantom holding a flaming jade on top of a giant hellish python. A large number of guild masters produced by Hades' workshop were surging onto the battlefield. In an instant, the stalemate was broken. Under Gala's order, the huge ballista was lifted from the rear of the army and aimed at the outer wall of the Twilight Village. It spewed out an indescribable dark green brilliance. The light rapidly expanded, and in the end, it turned into a torrent in the air, rapidly extending forward. The eternal twilight of the setting sun was torn apart, along with the indestructible outer wall. In the blink of an eye, more than 30 guild masters had completely broken through the outermost layer of defense. In Hades' hand, the essence of calamity from hell was once again displayed in the form of a large swarm. It displayed a shocking power, and after breaking through the outermost layer of defense, it marched straight in. Gala did not hesitate to squander the bargaining chip from his employer. He knocked on the hilt of his sword and urged the army to press forward again. "Come, let me see what other good things you have hidden." He grinned, revealing the gorgeous gold ornaments on his sharp teeth. After so many years, he could no longer wait to fight against Great Sea Ming from the present realm. His eyes lit up with excitement as he asked, "Where is your group? Where is your limit?" On the throne of Sunmaker, Huaishur was expressionless. He just knocked on the armrest. "Please let us fight, Your Excellency." Roland gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and said with a gloomy expression, "We must make the demons who invaded the sanctum pay the price." "Don't worry," Huaishur said. "Mr. Roland, I have seen the bravery of Charlemagne's knights. Now is not the time for you to show up again. Besides, the inner layer and the eternal frost furnace still need your protection." Roland was stunned. "Are we going to retreat and defend?" "Of course not." Huaishur laughed and pointed at the golden chariot in the enemy's formation. "Look, Mr. Roland, the person on the other side is challenging me." He said, "No matter what, we must let him get what he wants." At that moment, the earth shook violently and roared. The reason for that was because there were burning flames that were flowing through the earth. Burning flames. From the eternal frost furnace that was slowly opening, a terrifying heat gushed out. From a space that looked like a chariot's equipment room, countless huge assembly equipment was burned. The steel arms that could not be retracted in time turned into molten iron and quickly melted, flowing on the ground. A ferocious outline appeared from the flames. Brighter rays appeared on the pitch-black alchemy armor, and under the heavy steel cover, the angry incarnation raised its eyes. Then, in the flames, the silhouettes of countless blades and axes appeared, turning into a storm and whistling forward. The steel ground was torn apart like a thin piece of paper, leaving behind deep slash marks. When the giant bull-like creature raised its head and neighed, a thunderous roar covered everything. The storm of flames and iron pushed forward. It was as if an ominous comet had descended from the sky, flying close to the ground and crashing into the turbulent battlefield. Under the infusion of divinity and source substance, the activated source substance equipment showed an unprecedented sharpness and terrifying posture, galloping in blood and corpses. Tyrannically, it sprinkled death and destruction. Endless anger spread as it moved forward, spreading on every defender's body, causing the blades in their hands, bullets, and even their eyes to turn fiery red. This anger was planted in the souls of every believer, turning into an inextinguishable flame. The blessings from Great Sea Ming were bestowed upon everyone. "Holy!" The park guards and the lizard men army shouted excitedly, chasing after the burning figure with no regard for their own safety, charging forward again. Looking down from the sky, it was like an inextinguishable flame suddenly ignited in the darkness. The uncontrollable flame spread rapidly, burning the grayish-black tide, igniting the opponents who overestimated themselves, turning them into firewood. It did not care that the followers behind it were shaken off, nor did it care that the enemy had prepared a trap in front of it. The angry incarnation lowered its eyes, the 6 sharp horns aimed at the pocket formation that was opening towards it, its iron hooves stomping the ground as it charged forward again. The mist and the pocket were torn apart at the same time, blood raining down like a storm, falling to the ground together with sparks and ashes. With just a single exchange, the lion-headed dwarf and its illusions collapsed together with it. After spitting a mouthful of magma spit in disdain, the angry incarnation raised its eyes again, glancing at the hell serpent not far away and the group leader riding on the serpent, holding the blazing jade in his hand. On the serpent, the group leader was shocked, pulling the reins, causing the serpent to curl up, quickly retreating to a safe distance. Then, flames rose from the blazing jade, hovering above its head like a cluster of stars. Each flaming star carried a terrifying lethality comparable to that of a missile, and they were aimed at the enemy in the distance. However, the group leader still felt that it was not enough. It was still trying its best to activate its treasures, causing the blazing stars to increase, almost forming an ocean. Then it saw it. From a long distance away, the angry incarnation coldly retracted its gaze and charged in another direction. It ran away. Anger rose from its heart. It could no longer suppress it. The blazing jade aimed at the angry incarnation's back, and over 400 blazing stars were ready to be fired. At that moment, it saw its own hands holding the blazing jade. It did not know when, but it was already covered in wrinkles. It was shocked. Immediately afterwards, the hell snake he was sitting on collapsed with a loud rumble, pierced through by something extremely sharp. Pitch-black poisonous blood gushed out from its eyes. In the poisonous blood, clusters of pure white iris flowers bloomed together with countless beautiful flowers, their fragrance spreading. Long before that, countless tiny vines that grew out of the scales had already extended to their master's body. They silently entered the body and grew wantonly. On its decaying face, countless mycelium grew out of its 7 orifices. They sprouted rapidly, taking away its last bit of strength. This body had long since turned into a nest of poison and decay. In its last trance, it seemed to see a pure, white silhouette stepping on the flowers, leaving silently beside it. However, it seemed to have recalled something, and the compassionate white deer returned. It lowered its head and stared at the twitching face. A slender vine grew out like a nimble little hand. It pulled out the extinguished flame jade from his hand and adorned it on its luxuriant and gorgeous antlers. It looked like a gem embedded on the top of a crown. It was a perfect fit. It looked at Bloody, nodded in satisfaction, and got up to leave. All that was left in the darkness was the rapidly declining swarm lords, who stared at the skies in despair, and the hundreds of burning stars that were slowly descending upon them. Flames rose, spreading along with heat waves, illuminating the battlefield in a fleeting moment. It illuminated the flowers and grass on the ground that had bloomed without anyone noticing. The hurricane carried fine seeds and fragrant aroma, spreading to the entire battlefield. I feel like I'm more of a villain than the other side. Huaisher rubbed his chin and suddenly realized something. He asked Roland beside him, "We should be the good guys, right?" Well, the corner of Roland's eyes twitched. He wanted to say something, but stopped, although it was a little inappropriate for Paladin, who represented justice, to do this. However, at the same time, he also knew his duty as a knight. As a tool of war, as long as he could win, it did not matter what means he used. However, this new overlord's methods were a little too ridiculous. Was the organization called the Astronomical Society all like this? Could he not do something in the world of the living? Aha! Isn't it a little ridiculous? Huaisher scratched his head and coughed awkwardly. It's okay, I'll correct the style. The Astronomical Society is a righteous organization. How can we be the same as the demons in hell? Behind him, the alchemy fire in the eternal frost furnace finally extinguished slowly, The casting was over. In the furnace fire, the sword of virtue disappeared without a trace. Then, the brilliance that represented endless love and hope rose into the sky. A solemn crown of light was on top of its head. The sacred white horse walked on hell. Chapter 889. There was light emerging from a darkness. In a literal sense, this dark battlefield that even the illusory sun couldn't illuminate was pierced by the sharp light that made one's heart palpitate. It was wiped out and lined up from the middle to the two sides, as if an ocean was opened in front of Sage. All the darkness disappeared without a trace. Only the light of virtue shone. But after witnessing such a resplendent light, perhaps no one would doubt its significance anymore, right? Even Paladin Roland, the paladin, couldn't help but hold his breath, widen his eyes, and focus on the pure light. Pure, clear, and at the same time, full of unparalleled power, just like the embodiment of virtue. It illuminated all flaws and ugliness, drew the line between good and evil, and became the yardstick to measure all things. After fusing with Huai Shi's kindness, the sword of virtue, which had completely turned into an origin equipment, rose to a new level after undergoing a nirvana transformation. It was simpler than expected. It should be said that it originally had such potential. The prince's sword and the white horse were originally part of those beautiful stories. What was completed at this moment was just a combination again, although it was a little fat, but the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty. At this moment, on the white horse, a distant and fleeting figure appeared. The face that looked like Huai Shi raised, wearing a crown of light on its head. The eternal frost furnace operated loudly, and a huge amount of divinity burned vigorously. The pure light gathered into a beam in the phantom's hand, and in front of it, the almost endless tide slashed out. The dark ocean was opened up again, to the two sides, just like dawn. There were no cries of pain, no shouts of fear, only silent annihilation. There was no pain, no despair, and no hesitation. The large groups of hell bathed in the light of nothingness collapsed silently, only fine ashes floating in the wind, quickly disappearing without a trace. Under the great light from dawn, they were completely finished together with the long night. Even if they were only grazed by the edge of the light, the dukes of hell welcomed tragic wounds and marks. Their limbs, wings, and even large areas of skin were quickly disappearing. They couldn't feel any pain, and they couldn't feel any discomfort, as if they had been born with a missing part of their limbs. Purification, regardless of whether it was the hell sequences created by alchemy or the large herds raised by Helios. Once they approached the white horse and stepped into the light where it was, they would feel the purifying power. The weak would be reduced to ashes on the spot, while the strong would be suppressed and gradually worn down. The white horse galloped on the spreading grassland. The large group of people from paradise who were wielding blades of wrath and the lizard men army gathered and followed and guarded the white horse. Once again, they launched a counterattack. On the eternal frost furnace, Huai Shi closed his eyes and felt the exuberant alchemy fire in the furnace. After replacing the eternal despair, it became the new source of motivation. Or rather, the transformation center. Now, the alchemy fire was continuously absorbing the supply of all the land, absorbing the mixed divinity, source, heat, electricity, and even curses and blessings. After integrating them, they were injected into the axis of hell, maintaining the operation of the entire Twilight Village. Although it couldn't be compared to the terrifying output of the former perpetual motion machine, it was still not inferior to the supply that any large alchemy array could bring. At the same time, it also burned vigorously in the furnace of the eternal frost furnace as Huai Shi's forging fire. At this moment, the forging furnace on Huai Shi's metallized right arm had been unfolded. Through the array on the Sunmaker's throne, it was connected to the eternal frost furnace and even the entire Twilight Village. There was no disharmony or abnormality. As the main control center of the Twilight Village, The eternal frost furnace was a miracle crystallization that exhausted the wisdom and skills of all the forgers, as well as all the treasures and collections of the Twilight Village. At the same time, it was also an unprecedented forging furnace. Through the 13 sub-control centers and countless arrays throughout the Twilight Village, it could completely control the changes of the Twilight Village. The Sunmaker's throne was proof of this power. As the last forger recognized by the Sunmaker and the young arbiter of life who had cut off the eternal dusk, Huaishur naturally received the recognition of the eternal frost furnace and had the authority to use it. As long as there was a sufficient supply of energy, Huaishur could almost be regarded as a miniature version of the Sunmaker when he sat there and was connected to the eternal frost furnace. Apart from his inferior skills and limited energy supply, he could do everything that the Sunmaker could do. This was the blessing of the eternal frost furnace to its user. It was just like the blessing of the legendary workshop to alchemists, which was even enough to raise one to the level of a great grandmaster. Before he backstabbed Helios, Hades also had considerable authority. Now, even without Helios' support, this former chief could rely on his understanding of Helios to create a large group of hell alchemists of such a terrifying scale. Not to mention that Hades' alchemy attainments were far superior to Huaishur's. Even though Huaishur alchemy had improved again, at best, it could only be used to measure the gap between Hades and a great grandmaster. How far was Hades from becoming a great grandmaster? Moreover, the other party was the Abyss Jester who had the Pied Piper backing him. No one knew what other trump cards he was hiding. Both sides had been fighting for so long, and Huaishur was almost going all out, but Hades hadn't even shown his face yet. Who knew what the hell that old fox was still brewing? I have to put in more effort, Huaishur softly muttered, his left hand tapping the armrest as he fell in a deep thought. With the eternal frost furnace here, he would be free of worries and no longer have to worry about the threat of the eternal beast. As long as he sat on the Sunmaker's throne, it was equivalent to having the entire Twilight Village help him withstand the pressure of the destruction element. The eternal frost furnace, which had once contained countless despair and resentment, could naturally withstand the erosion of the eternal beast. Therefore, he could safely use the sacred mark to transform his source substance equipment. But now he had the tools, materials, and abilities. It could be said that he had everything, except for money. After squandering just now, the little divinity he earned from Helios had been completely consumed. As for Great Si Ming's own divinity, Huaishur would never consider it. What a joke, that was his own money. It was not easy to save up a little bit, but it had to be used where it was needed most. Now that he had squandered it, what would happen to the inner circle of Doomsday? What would happen to his future advancement? But he couldn't earn it, and he didn't want to use his savings. Now he could only freeload. Hello? Are you there? Huaishur looked at Rachel and motioned for him to contact Garland behind him. I'm a mercenary. Can you give me some divinity? Rachel fell into a long silence. His expression twitched. He didn't know if he was waiting for a reply from the other side, or if he had never seen such a strange freeloading method. But soon, a brilliant stream of light flew out from Garland's silent tower and went straight into the eternal frost furnace, causing the flames of the alchemy fire to rise and expand by several times in an instant. It wasn't the tiny amount that Huaishur had expected. Instead, he had directly taken out half of his inventory and tossed it over to her. With such a large amount, if he planned carefully, he would even be able to create 4 or 5 divine stigmata above level 4. Huaishur widened his eyes in surprise and clapped his hands. Thank you, boss. You're so generous. Rachel's expression twitched again. He glared at Huaishur and said, The great master said that's all, and there's nothing more. You should take care of yourself. So stingy. Huaishur snorted and looked at him with disdain. The feeling of ordinary goods made Rachel feel powerless. How could a person's face be so thick? He finally found a second place where he was inferior to Huaishur. But when he looked at Huaishur's face again, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel indignant. Okay, it's the third. Then he heard a high-pitched and sharp sound. It was like countless crows' sharp cries. Following Huaishi's movements, countless steel feathers emerged from the void and gathered together, turning into a cloud-like forging pattern. The outline was ferocious and mournful. Divine sword, hatred. Rachel subconsciously took a step back. His heart palpitated. He was intimidated by such a fierce power. When Huaishi's 5 fingers loosened, the blood-colored long sword passed through the crack in the floor and fell into the eternal flame of the eternal frost furnace. Casting began. In the darkness of the cage of dreams, countless sleeping crow raised their scarlet eyes and felt the call for more. Hatred surged in the black clouds and quickly turned into a rain of blood that poured down. The alchemy fire rumbled, and the slender blade of the divine sword silently dissipated. What replaced it was countless steel crows that emerged from the void. They cried out hungrily, rolled up their iron wings, and once again soared under the dim light of the setting sun. Many ferocious shadows gathered in one place and covered the earth. His scarlet eyes looked down at the ground. The hunt had begun. Thousands of iron crows, under the support of the village of dusk and hatred, turned into a tidal torrent that swept across the battlefield. These cunning and cruel predators avoided all opponents that they couldn't defeat. Instead, they chose most of the large groups of hell that the other incarnations disdained to look at as their opponents. The hell creatures below the level of the leader of the horde were unable to resist the overwhelming torrent. Wherever the iron wings passed, all bodies were cleanly smashed into smithereens. Blood and origin substance were instantly sucked dry. The iron crows rose and fell like clouds on the battlefield, returning full of life and origin substance. After throwing them into the furnace, they welcomed another round of refinement before rushing back to the battlefield. The merciless hunting machines threw themselves into the slaughter, endlessly bringing new energy to the eternal frost furnace. This was the tribe that the village of dusk loved, the large groups of hell that were perfectly compatible with the eternal frost furnace. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.